Chapter 2563, Suppressing Everyone, Crazy Zero Wing. When more than 1,000 Tier 3 NPCs appeared behind Shifeng, the Dark players, Zero Wing's members, and the Hell Legion were stunned. In the various NPC kingdoms and empires, Tier 3 NPCs were considered powerhouses. They could even serve as magistrates in minor cities. And yet, Shifeng had just summoned over 1,000 of these NPCs, including non-human NPCs. It was unbelievable. We already have so many. When Gentle Snow saw Shifeng's night division, surprise colored her features. She had known for a while that Shifeng had invested a ton of coins in developing the guild's night division, but she had assumed they'd need a long time to amass and nurture so many Tier 3 NPCs. During Shifeng's visit to the Western continent, she had felt they'd be lucky enough to gain an additional 200 or 300 Tier 3 knights, but contrary to her expectations, they had several times that. With this many Tier 3 knights, not even taking out an army of more than 10,000 Tier 3 players would be a problem, much less defeating the 6,000 Tier 3 dark players before them. The reason was very simple. Not only were NPCs' basic attributes far higher than players of the same level and tier, but they also commanded a large number of skills and spells. Their skill and spell completion rates also triumphed over players. Moreover, as God's domain underwent more system updates, NPCs' intellect and combat standards would improve. At Tier 3, NPCs could already, more or less, rival refinement realm experts, with some surpassing them. This was why even Tier 3 players would receive a one-sided beating if they challenged Tier 3 NPCs. Of course, the biggest difference between the two was NPCs' equipment standards. Acquiring level 100 plus fine gold weapons and equipment was currently incredibly difficult for players, but even the weakest of God's domain's Tier 3 NPCs, at least those not bound to players, wore full sets of dark gold equipment. Most of Zero Wing's Tier 3 knights, on the other hand, wore epic equipment. Even Tier 3 Void Realm experts would have to flee from these knights, let alone Tier 3 Refinement Realm experts. The surrounding 6,000 plus Tier 3 dark players unconsciously began to retreat. The major powers' upper echelons watched on with grim expressions, astonished. None of them had ever thought Zero Wing's strength would be this frightening. When they had learned, throughout their investigations, that Zero Wing had nearly 600 Tier 3 knights, the prospect of dealing with the guild had given them huge headaches. If they wanted to capture Stone Forest City, they knew they'd have to work with the main continent's various superpowers. But not only had they just learned that Zero Wing had 5 Crimson Dragon flying ships, but it also had more than twice the reported Tier 3 knights. Just how were they supposed to fight such a force? Is this why he hadn't hesitated to give away 70% of Cold Spring Forest's resource spots? Realization dawned on Blue Rainbow as she watched Shifeng. She had thought the man was insane for giving up so much of Cold Spring Forest and increasing the competition between his guild and the Dark World's various powers, but looking at it now, it seemed she had been sorely mistaken. With so much combat power, no power or player in the Dark World would dare compete with Zero Wing for the remaining 30% of Cold Spring Forest. On the contrary, Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society would have a much harder time controlling their 70%. Most of the two guilds' influence lay in the Dark World, and outside of it, they had barely any at all. If the Dark World's players were too afraid to take a bite out of Zero Wing's resource spots, it would only be natural that they'd contest with Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society's territory instead. Damn it! How is this possible? Fury's heart felt as if he were going mad as he gazed at the 1,000-plus Tier 3 NPCs behind Shifeng. He couldn't fathom how Zero Wing had gotten its hand on so many, and every one wore excellent equipment, too. Against such a force, not even an army of more than 10,000 Tier 3 experts would have an advantage. Moreover, the Tier 3 experts that had joined the invading army belonged to the various guilds and adventurer teams. Commanding them like a proper army would prove very difficult. No one wanted to serve as cannon fodder and die a pointless death. If the invading army had had an absolute advantage, overwhelming Zero Wing's experts with their numbers would have been easy, but now that there was such a radical difference between the two sides' strength, the various guilds and adventurer teams' Tier 3 experts wouldn't be so keen to take action. The 1,000+ NPCs waiting for orders petrified the Dark World's players. They simply stared at Shifeng and his NPCs in silence, stupefying Blue Frost's group. Even the Hell Legion's members were astonished. Before coming here, they had accepted their impending deaths. They had been massively outnumbered, after all. Even if they were more powerful individually, they wouldn't be able to kill enough players with their limited stamina and concentration. However, none of them had imagined that the situation would develop as it had. The army of several million, which had boldly marched into Cold Spring Forest, had come to a grinding halt, and none of the Dark World's players dared to step forward. Everyone stood frozen in front of the teleportation gate. After the silence had dragged on for a while, Dawn Dominance emerged from the crowd, presenting himself before Shifeng once more. This time, however, the man didn't look down on Shifeng. Rather, he appeared cautious. Guild leader Black Flame, you truly are amazing. It's no wonder how you established Stone Forest City in Cold Spring Forest, Dawn Dominance said, applauding Shifeng in admiration. Since everyone here has recognized your display of strength, on behalf of the Dark World's various guilds and adventurer teams, I will declare that we will not participate in Zero Wing's struggle against the various superpowers. Do you find this arrangement agreeable, Guild leader Black Flame? While Dawn Dominance spoke, the various guilds and adventurer teams' upper echelons nodded in agreement. If Zero Wing had proven as weak as they had expected, they wouldn't have had a problem, but now that they saw how mighty the guild was, they wouldn't fight it. Even if they worked with the main continent's various superpowers, capturing Stone Forest City was impossible. They'd only incur unnecessary losses if they faced Zero Wing in battle. Dawn Dominance. How can you do this? Furious Heart bellowed, enraged, when he heard Dawn Dominance surrender to Zero Wing. To goad the Dark World's various powers into attacking Zero Wing, Demon's Heart had offered world domination a plethora of benefits. However, now that the situation had turned south, Dawn Dominance had decided to give up. With world domination leading the Dark World's surrender, the other world's other powers wouldn't target Zero Wing either. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Before Furious Heart could continue to curse at Dawn Dominance, however, Shifeng shook his head. Guild leader Dawn, how many times must I repeat myself before you get it through your head? I am only here to notify you that Zero Wing will be managing the Dark World's teleportation gate from now on, and in the future, my guild will collect a fee from anyone that wishes to use it. Have I been specific enough now? Shifeng asked the other guild leader. I don't care if you wish to work with those superpowers against Stone Forest City or not. Dawn Dominance, who had intended to say more, was speechless. Even Furious Heart, who had been angrily cursing in the distance, gaped at Shifeng. Is this guy insane? Dawn Dominance has already declared that none of us would target Stone Forest City, yet he insists on managing the teleportation gate. Does he really want to make the entire Dark World his enemy? When Magic Flash heard Shifeng's response, he, too, was at a loss for words. This was the best outcome Zero Wing could hope for, but rather than settling, Shifeng insisted on owning the Dark World's teleportation gate. He was a madman. Chapter 2564, Crazy. Night Division take action. Does he really plan to start a war with the entire Dark World? Even Furious Heart, who wanted nothing more than Zero Wing and Shifeng's annihilation, was confused by the swordsman's actions. He even wondered if he had misheard the man. Instead of settling for a peaceful outcome, Shifeng continued to insist that he'd wrestle for control over the Dark World's teleportation gate. Even if they banded together, the various superpowers wouldn't dare threaten such a thing. In fact, they hadn't even harbored the thought. The teleportation gate was basically the otherworld player's lifeline, and if a foreign power took control of the gate, all of the Dark World's residents would be subjected to that power's whims. These dark players simply wouldn't allow such an outcome. They'd fight anyone who threatened to control the teleportation gate to the death. This was why neither Demon's Heart nor the various superpowers had considered doing so. If they tried, not only would they fail, but they'd also throw their lives away in the attempt to control the teleportation gate. And yet, Shifeng didn't just consider it an option, he fully intended to succeed. As Shifeng finished speaking, the dark players around him erupted in an uproar. Is Black Flame insane? He's trying to take control of our world's lifeline. We're already giving up so much by surrendering in the fight for Stone Forest City, yet Black Flame wants a mile after we've given him an inch. Does he really doubt that we'll attack Zero Wing? The fear the Dark World's various major powers and independent players had felt a moment ago vanished. Now, only fury flashed in their eyes. They all wanted nothing more than to show Shifeng the consequences for his ignorance. The Dark World players began to close in on Zero Wing's guild leader. Their Tier 3 experts, who had decided to avoid a fight moments ago, were now more than eager to teach the swordsman a lesson. 7,000. 9,000. 10,000. In less than a minute, more than 20,000 Tier 3 experts had surrounded Shifeng. Every one of them glared, radiating rage and killing intent. The guild leader's not serious, right? Evening Lotus worriedly asked from beside Blue Frost as she watched more Tier 3 experts gather around them. With the combined strength of Zero Wing's Tier 3 knights, Tier 3 experts, and the Crimson Dragon flying ship, they could, at most, take on 10,000 Tier 3 experts at a time. Any more, and their risk of dying increased substantially. If they had to face all of the Dark World's Tier 3 experts, they'd be finished. Here, they didn't have the protection of Stone Forest City. Moreover, NPCs were far more troublesome to resurrect than players. Generally, the various powers only used their NPC SW as a deterrent and avoided sending them into battle unless absolutely necessary. Are you serious, Guild Leader Black Flame? Dawn Dominance asked after taking a deep breath, a cold glint flashing in his eyes. While he could ignore the struggle for Stone Forest City, he couldn't ignore Shifeng's declaration to control the teleportation gate as it involved his guild's continued development. Of course. Shifeng confidently replied. He hadn't actually considered taking control of the Dark World's teleportation gate before today, but times had changed. He had developed his night division far faster than expected, and it was now far stronger than it appeared. Shifeng wouldn't have been able to do anything about the situation if the teleportation gate had opened anywhere else. Since it had opened in Cold Spring Forest, where his night division was based, however, he'd be a fool not to take advantage of it. Due to the Dark World's nature, regular powers and players had an incredibly difficult time establishing themselves in the Otherworld. Not even the various super guilds were guaranteed success. Yet, as luck would have it, the Dark World offered an extraordinary amount of attributed resources, and because of this, the various superpowers of his past had done everything in their power to ally with the Dark World's various powers. However, even after paying astronomical sums, those superpowers had only acquired a small number of attributed resources to use in crafting weapons and equipment. If he were to let this opportunity slip through his fingers, he wouldn't likely find another. Good. It seems you've steeled yourself to make the Dark World your enemy, Guild Leader Black Flame. Dawn Dominance said and smiled. Since that is the case, show us what profound move you'll use to stop us. Dawn Dominance's head had begun to ache over surrendering his share of Stone Forest City's benefits. A few thousand Tier 3 experts were certainly no match for Zero Wing's current combat power. He'd need the Dark World's entire strength. Normally, however, persuading his homeworld's major powers and independent powers to dedicate themselves to what was essentially a suicide mission would be impossible. Fortunately, Shifeng had just given him the opening to succeed with an extremely persuasive bargaining chip, the Dark World's very future. This would be more than enough of a reason for the Dark World's masses to combine their strength. Even if Shifeng's group fell back to Stone Forest City, they wouldn't be able to stop the Otherworld's forces. Why are you still wasting time with him, Guild Leader Dawn? That's right. He only has a little over 1,000 Tier 3 NPCs. Even if we die and lose a level, we can recover quickly and rejoin the fight. On the other hand, those NPCs will be gone for good once they're dead. Let's see if Black Flame keeps acting so arrogantly once we've gotten rid of his NPCs. The various powers experts and independent players riled themselves up and charged at Shifeng's group the moment Dawn Dominance finished speaking. Over 20,000 Tier 3 experts and several 100,000 Tier 2 players advanced, their footfalls shaking the entire valley. Despite their bountiful combat experience, the Hell Legion's members grew nervous, watching the incoming force with grim expressions. This battle would be more terrifying than any they had participated in. The Dark World's various powers didn't even prepare any of their trump cards. Relying solely on their numbers, the invading army could intimidate even God's domain's various superpowers. Moreover, some of the Dark players used Tier 3 defensive magic scrolls to cope with potential Tier 4 attacks. This greatly limited how effective the flying ships could be in this fight. Ha ha ha. Die. So what if you have over 1,000 Tier 3 NPCs and 5 flying ships? None of them can reach their full potential in such a vast plane. Furious Heart excitedly shouted as he watched the Dark players swarm toward Shurfong. Every Dark player participating in the army was an expert. They had long since familiarized themselves with large-scale combat and knew how to minimize the damage enemy AoE attacks could deal. Furthermore, unlike in a siege, Zero Wing's forces didn't have a defensive magic array to hide behind. Once the two armies engaged, war weapons like the Crimson Dragon flying ships and large-scale destruction spells would be nearly useless. However, Shurfong didn't mobilize his flying ships or instruct his Tier 3 magical class NPCs to cast large-scale destruction spells as everyone had expected. He simply watched the Dark players approach in silence. Have they forgotten how to attack, scared silly? They must not have expected an actual fight, but it's too late for regret now. The Dark players were confused when Zero Wing's forces remained motionless, but that didn't stop them in closing the distance. 100 yards. 50 yards. 30 yards. Fools. When less than 30 yards separated Shurfeng's forces from the Dark players, he swung a hand forward and shouted, "Attack!" Suddenly, over 100 tall, brawny oars geared with epic weapons and equipment exploded forth, reaching the enemy's frontline in the blink of an eye. They brandished their swords and axes, cutting down the enemy Tier 3 MTs with speed and accuracy. Read latest chapters at Wuxia EU. Skillfully responding to the Or Knight's assault, the Tier 3 MTs raised their shields, effectively blocking the attacks. After a moment, however, every Dark player was stupefied. The instant the Or's weapons slammed into the Tier 3 MT's shields, every player that took a hit flew backward as if a giant boulder had slammed into them. From afar, it had looked like the Dark World's army had crashed into an immovable wall. Not only had the army's advance ended in a grinding halt, but bodies flew above the rest of the force, as well. Before these players fell to the ground, however, countless magic arrays appeared above, bombarding them with another series of attacks. The casters exhibited astounding control with their spells, and the spells themselves were unbelievably powerful. Every attack had as much power as level 110 mythic monsters. Despite their defensive spells' protection, the targeted players lost every last HP in no time at all. Over 1,000 Tier 3 players and several Tier 3 players had died in less than a second, leaving nothing but empty space among the tide of Dark players. The Dark World's denizens hadn't even had a chance to retaliate. Chapter 2565, Frightening Night Division, True Despair. Less than 10 seconds after the battle had begun, the Dark players' confidence shattered. The MTs on the front line were bona fide Tier 3 players, and many of them were well-known experts in the Dark World. They had so much HP and defense that they could stand there, unfazed, as other Tier 3 experts wailed on them. And yet, these same Tier 3 MTs were dying too quickly for the rear line's healers to restore their HPs. They had lost their lives without any chance to retaliate. For a moment, everyone watching wondered if those MTs had deliberately worn bronze equipment into battle. Their opponents were only level 120 plus, Tier 3 NPCs, and many of the Dark World's players had fought NPC cities Tier 3 soldiers before. Although Tier 3 NPCs might have higher basic attributes and combat standards, the difference shouldn't be this massive. Even Zero Wing's players were stunned. The Tier 3 Knights had slain over 1,000 Tier 3 players and several thousand Tier 2 players with a single round of attacks. Such a force would even give super guilds a painful headache, and putting an end to the battle would take quite a while. However, those Tier 2 and 3 dark players were little more than infants before the Tier 3 knights. The two sides' combat power was on entirely different levels. Only Shifeng remained unperturbed. His Tier 3 knights only seemed to be 10 or so levels higher than the enemy's Tier 3 players on the surface. Logically, there shouldn't be such a huge gap between the two forces' strength, even if the Tier 3 knights were fully armed with epic weapons and equipment. However, God's Domain's current players didn't know that there were significant differences among NPCs' combat power, even at Tier 3. One of the most obvious was the liberation of their mana bodies. Unlike players, NPCs did not need to invest a large amount of time to unlock their mana body's potential after reaching Tier 3. Instead, they relied on their talent and growth potential. As long as Tier 3 NPCs had the required talent and growth potential, they could unlock their mana bodies immediately. Conversely, some failed to accomplish the feat throughout their lifetimes. The applicants Shifeng had accepted into his Knight division were considered elites among NPCs. Their innate talent and growth potential were far superior to the soldiers in NPC cities. Hence, as soon as they reached Tier 3, they had unlocked their mana body's full potential. They hadn't needed to experiment as players did. But what about God's Domain's current players? Most hadn't even started the process of unlocking their mana bodies, let alone unlock them fully. They were 10 years too early if they thought they could stand against Shifeng's Knight division. Moreover, Shifeng had employed plenty of ors, elves, and giants. Their combat power was even greater than human NPCs of the same tier and level. For example, a mysterious iron-ranked or warrior could rival a secret silver-ranked human warrior. Of the non-human members of Shifeng's Knight division, even the weakest had mysterious iron growth potential. Not even Tier 3 peak experts in full, top-tier equipment would last more than a few seconds against these NPCs, much less ordinary Tier 3 experts. Before the Dark Worlds players could snap out of their daze, Zero Wings Knights swept through them again. Like harvesting wheat, the Knights needed no more than 3 moves to slay the Dark players, reaping their lives in the blink of an eye. None had time for elegant or astonishing combat techniques on this battlefield. Only pure strength and terror reigned. The first unit, consisting of more than 50,000 players, had been annihilated in less than 2 minutes, and over 6,000 of them had been Tier 3 experts. In contrast, Zero Wing hadn't lost a single knight. In fact, they had hardly taken any damage. Silence descended on the battlefield. The Dark players that had eagerly charged into combat had begun to back away, one step after another. How is this possible? Furious Heart, who had been preparing to join the fray, gasped when he saw the field of corpses. He had assumed the Dark World's overwhelming victory had been assured, he had never expected the battle to end like this. They were talking about more than 6,000 Tier 3 experts. The horrific force could easily destroy a guild city, yet before Zero Wings Knight division, those experts had been as weak as common monsters. How do they have so much more combat power? Blue Rainbow and Elder Gold, who watched from afar, were just as shocked after watching the Knights obliterate the first wave of players. They had thought Shifeng's confidence had been a joke. They had never dreamed that his guild was actually this strong. When Zero Wing had refrained from using its flying ships, they had seen the decision as foolish. Looking at it now, however, that was not the case. Zero Wing had merely decided against using the ships because it didn't need them. How could these 1,000 plus NPCs even be Tier 3 beings? They seemed more like Tier 4 mythic monsters, and ones with incredibly high combat standards. If the Dark World wanted to defeat such a frightening force, it would have to rely on its foundations. Otherwise, it didn't matter how many players they sent at those Tier 3 NPCs. All would perish. How are these Tier 3 NPCs so strong? Dawn Dominance frowned after watching several thousand Tier 3 experts die. Gritting his teeth, he snarled, "Everyone, now is not the time to hold back. All guilds and adventurer teams, use your trump cards and crush those NPCs. If we keep holding back, Zero Wing will take the teleportation gate. The various guilds and adventurer teams' upper echelons immediately took action. Zero Wing's Night Division might be scary, but their members were no pushovers. Like Zero Wing, they had trump cards that could boost their combat power far above what they currently wielded. One after another, the guilds and adventurer teams activated their trump cards. Tier 4 Summoning Scrolls. Advanced Magic Barriers. Tier 3 Personal Guards. In less than a minute, more than 50 Tier 4 summoned creatures and 4,000 Tier 3 personal guards appeared on the battlefield, their combined aura making everyone in the vicinity shudder. The various superpowers members watching the battle from a safe distance were especially flabbergasted. The Dark Worlds guilds and adventurer teams had just revealed their strength in its fullest. Amazing. Truly amazing. No individual power can hope to stand against the Dark World. Furious Heart's heart pounded as he watched. He had been shocked to see Zero Wing field over 1,000 Tier 3 NPCs, but that was nothing before the Dark World's full power. Read latest chapters at World. EU, excellent. Everyone, attack. Dawn Dominance proudly ordered. Annihilate Zero Wing and avenge our fallen brothers. As soon as they heard the command, the various guilds and adventurer teams sent their Tier 3 NPCs and Tier 4 summoned creatures into battle. Not even they had thought their combined strength would be so terrifying. Zero Wing's players began to panic a little. Now, the tides had turned. But just as the Dark World's residents expected to see Shifeng fall into despair, the person in question gazed upon the approaching NPC force and summoned creatures with an extraordinary calm before retrieving a small ring from his bag. Miniature World. Chapter 2566, Mouths Ajar. Seeing Shifeng step forward and chant an incantation, Blue Rainbow and Elder Gold were stunned. He still wants to fight. Confusion changed Blue Rainbow's expression when Shifeng showed no intention of retreating. The difference between their combat power was clear for all to see. The Dark World's invading army was far too strong for any individual power to stop. Based on Shifeng's behavior, however, he intended to stay in this fight. Blue Rainbow struggled to understand. During its investigations, Dark Rhapsody had obtained quite a bit of detailed information on Zero Wing from the main continent's superpowers and knew the guild had a plethora of astounding trump cards. The Ring of Gospel, a domain treasure, was one of them. When activated on a large battlefield, it had proven miraculously effective. Not only did the Ring of Gospel have large AoE skills, but they were also considerably powerful. However, the ring's effects on this battlefield would be very limited. Zero Wing currently faced Tier 3 personal guards and Tier 4 summoned creatures, after all. They had incredible resistance to suppression effects. Moreover, more than 50 Tier 4 summoned creatures had joined the fight. Even if the Ring of Gospel could suppress them, a measly 1,000 plus Tier 3 NPCs wouldn't be enough to stop them. The invading army also had over 3,000 Tier 3 personal guards to support it. Even Graceful Monarch and Purple Rakshasa, who watched from a hidden location, were confused. What is Black Flame trying to do? Is he going for broke? They had only come to get a glimpse of the Dark World's strength. They had never dreamed that they'd witness a large-scale war between Zero Wing and the Otherworld. They had been unprecedentedly shocked after seeing Zero Wing's combat power. No one had expected the guild to have the strength to stand up to a force that included every expert from an entire Otherworld. Moreover, Zero Wing had even successfully deterred the Dark World's experts. The guild's strength was unbelievable. When they recalled the relatively amicable relationship between their Extreme Light Shelter and Shelter 1, they breathed a sigh of relief. If Zero Wing wanted to, its Night Division alone was more than capable of flattening the entire Dark Denver. On the other hand, Zero Wing's current opponents were bona fide Tier 3 NPCs and Tier 4 mythic monsters. With such a large difference between the two sides' combat power and numbers, retreating to Stone Forest City was the wisest move Zero Wing could make. Every one of those Tier 3 knights was a part of Zero Wing's foundations, and if they were slain, Zero Wing would be crippled. Zero Wing had already proven its strength. Once news of this battle spread, the various superpowers that wanted to capture Stone Forest City would back down. The Dark World's players and powers wouldn't underestimate Zero Wing again. In fact, they might even avoid offending the guild's members in Cold Spring Forest. While Graceful Monarch and Purple Rakshasa were fraught with confusion, something suddenly changed above the valley. A phantom world gradually descended, growing as it grew closer to the valley floor. In less than 3 seconds, not only had the phantom world grown large enough to cover the battlefield, but it also enveloped the spectating players, including Graceful Monarch and Purple Rakshasa, in the distance. The instant they felt the phantom world's power, both Graceful Moon and Purple Rakshasa felt out of tune with the world around them. It felt like they had become enemies with their surroundings. Not only had their physique started to weaken, but they also lost a significant portion of their basic attributes. The Phantom World's power also seemed to affect the Tier 3 personal guards and Tier 4 summoned creatures. They had slowed considerably, and their auras even seemed significantly weaker. What did he do? Blue Rainbow gaped, shocked when she realized how much the Tier 3 NPCs and Tier 4 monsters had been suppressed. She had experienced domain's effects before, which tended to be much weaker than magic barriers. The stronger the target was, the less the domain would suppress it, yet Shifeng's domain had destroyed everything she thought she knew about the mechanic. Normally, not even intermediate magic arrays could suppress Tier 4 monsters to this extent, but within Shifeng's domain, their auras had weakened considerably. This domain could practically rival advanced magic barriers, and it was so massive that it covered the entire valley. She had never heard of such a powerful domain. Before anyone could react, however, Shifeng began another incantation. Ring of Brilliance. When he finished his chant, a light rippled across the battlefield, stunning every dark player in the area. Crap! This is cheating! Magic Flash cursed aloud, glaring at Zero Wing's Night Division. The intensity of those knights' auras had skyrocketed, and the combined energy made them feel as if they were truly a legion of Tier 4 monsters. The knights' mental states had also visibly improved. They looked nothing like they had a few moments ago. The sudden development caused an uproar among the various guilds and adventurer teams' upper echelons, who commanded the Tier 3 personal guards and Tier 4 summoned creatures, and they halted their advance, exchanging looks. A deathly silence had fallen over the Dark World's invading army, and the passion and killing intent they had radiated was nowhere to be seen. Do you wish to continue this fight? Shifeng calmly asked after sweeping his gaze over the dark players before him. This time, not one dark player dared to speak up. They simply stared back with angry, reluctant looks. Fight? More like suicide. Determined, they had revealed every trump card they had previously hidden, and yet, thanks to the Ring of Gospel's 2 skills, they hadn't even shortened the gap between their strength and Zero Wings. Rather, it had only grown. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Since no one responded to his question, Shifeng turned to Dawn Dominance, who still succumbed to his shock. Guild Leader Dawn, since you can speak on behalf of the Dark World, may I know if you wish to continue this battle? Shifeng asked, smiling at the robust man. Dawn Dominance's countenance turned ashen when he heard the question, and he was at a complete loss for words. If he chose to fight, he'd be sacrificing himself and his guild to oblivion. He had dispatched every Tier 3 personal guard world domination owned for the sake of driving the other guilds and adventurer teams into action. If just one of those NPCs died, his guild would suffer a huge blow. If they all died, world domination wouldn't survive. However, nothing would remain of world domination's hard-won prestige in the Dark World if he admitted defeat. Chapter 2567, Suppressing an Army of Millions. Upon hearing the question Shifeng directed at Dawn Dominance, silence fell over the battlefield as the various powers' upper echelons turned to look at World Domination's guild leader, who served as the Dark World's representative. Zero Wing's strength had far exceeded their expectations. The guild possessed not only an incredibly strong night division but also a domain treasure capable of significantly suppressing even Tier 4 creatures. The combination of the 2 cards meant no power could threaten Zero Wing's Night Legion at this stage of the game. For a time, silence reigned over the Dark World's army of several millions because of Shifeng's words. This situation stupefied Magic Flash and the others, who were spectating the battle from afar. Arrogance? Ignorance? When Magic Flash and the others thought back to the opinions they had of Shifeng, they realized how ridiculous those were. At the same time, they celebrated inwardly. This was because they finally saw for themselves what a true monster was today. Previously, in their opinion, single-handedly going up against thousands of enemies simultaneously could already be considered a legendary feat. In fact, 99% of the people who claimed to be capable of such a feat were undoubtedly spouting nonsense. As expert players, Magic Flash and his companions knew just how difficult it was to go up against thousands of enemies simultaneously, especially in a large-scale guild war. The enemy side would definitely have numerous expert players amidst their forces. Trying to fight against thousands in such a situation ramped up the difficulty. Now, however, not only did this legendary feat happen right before their very eyes, but the scale of this feat had even been magnified by 1,000. Shifeng had single-handedly suppressed an army of millions. Due to just this one scene, they could say with certainty that the name of Black Flame would shake the entire Dark World in the future. Is he really human? Purple Rakshas's heart pounded rapidly as she took in the army of millions remaining motionless before Shifeng. At this moment, she earnestly doubted Shifeng was human. He had intimidated several million expert players and several thousand Tier 3 NPCs. Although Shifeng's previous performance at the Extreme Light Shelter had already been plenty shocking, that feat was nothing compared to this. Even standing a great distance away, she had still shuddered upon sighting the army of millions. Shifeng, however, had single-handedly silenced these several million experts. The power and influence he wielded were simply inhuman. It seems Shelter 1 no longer has to worry about its development from now on, Graceful Monarch said, a bitter smile forming on her face as she gazed at Blue Frost, one of her rivals in the Dark Den. Originally, Graceful Monarch thought that, with Crimson Emperor's help, the Extreme Light Shelter could surpass Shelter 1 in the Dark Denver. In light of the turn of events, however, that was categorically impossible. Zero Wing was a guild capable of suppressing an entire world's players to the point where they didn't even dare to breathe. Once news of this feat reached the Dark Den, the experts that revered strength would definitely do everything they could to join Shelter 1 and Zero Wing. Moreover, Shifeng had previously displayed extraordinary individual strength in the Dark Denver. With these two factors combined, Shelter 1 would surely become a sacred land for Dark Den's experts. After the silence on the battlefield persisted for some time, Dawn Dominance walked up to Shifeng with an incomparably gloomy expression. The pride and fighting spirit he had before were nowhere to be seen now. Guild leader Black Flame, this move of yours is indeed amazing. I'm afraid nobody ever thought that Zero Wing might actually possess so much hidden strength, Dawn Dominance said after taking a deep breath. However, it is wise not to bum one's bridges. I admit that the domain skills you used are very powerful. However, these domain skills will only remain active so long as their user is alive. Once the user dies, the effects of the domain skills will disappear. The Dark World's army might not be a match for your army, but we have plenty of people. We have more than enough manpower to spare to kill you, the user of the domain skills. Of course, I also have to admit that we will suffer plenty of losses before we succeed. However, the final outcome is similarly one that you will not wish to see, Guild Leader Black Flame. Instead of suffering mutual destruction, why don't we each take a step back? Our request is very simple. So long as Zero Wing stops having designs on the teleportation gate, everything else is negotiable. Upon hearing Dawn Dominance's suggestion, realization immediately dawned upon the dark players present. Guild leader Dawn really is the best. How could we have forgotten such a thing? Due to the immense shock they felt before, one simple thing actually slipped their minds. In God's domain, magic arrays and domain skills required a user to sustain them. Domain tools were no exception. If they killed the player using the tool, then the tool would naturally lose effect. Meanwhile, once the Dark Army no longer suffered under the effects of Miniature World, taking care of Zero Wing would be a piece of cake. However, Dawn Dominance was also correct in that they would have to pay a huge price to annihilate Zero Wing if they continued fighting, and this was not something they wished to see. The best solution now was for both sides to each take a step back. What if I refuse? Shifeng asked, smiling. At Shifeng's words, silence filled the battlefield once more. Lunatic. He's definitely a lunatic. The Dark World has already taken a step back, yet he's still insisting on controlling the teleportation gate? Is he really not afraid of losing everything? The spectating experts of the various superpowers found Shifeng's intransigence insane. Previously, the Dark World's offer to give up on participating in the superpowers' fight for Stone Forest City was already plenty shocking. Now, the Dark World was even willing to take another step back and provide Zero Wing with other benefits in exchange for Zero Wing giving up its designs on the teleportation gate. In the eyes of the main continent's various superpowers, this was an unbelievable opportunity, something any power would wish to obtain, yet Shifeng had still rejected it without hesitation. They had no doubt that this was the Dark World's bottom line. There would be no more concessions after this. If Shifeng continued insisting on taking control of the teleportation gate, then Zero Wing really would enter an irreconcilable feud with the Dark World. Guild leader Black Flame, do you really intend to drag Zero Wing into a fight to the death? Dawn Dominance demanded as he tried to suppress the anger in his heart as much as possible. You'll regret it if that happens. Zero Wing's strength thoroughly exceeded Dawn Dominance's expectations. If both sides continued fighting, the only outcome would be mutual destruction, an outcome he was not willing to see. After all, world domination still needed to develop on the main continent. Without sufficient strength, its efforts would be futile. However, he never imagined that Shifeng would actually be so stubborn as to refuse to take a step back even when given an excellent opportunity to do so. Guild leader Dawn, there's no need to continue showing Black Flame any respect. Since he doesn't know how to appreciate goodwill, I say that we just teach him a lesson. At worst, we'll have a slower time developing on the main continent. That's right. Since he doesn't want the goodwill we're showing him, let's just annihilate Zero Wing and be done with this. Let's see what he can do then. The dark players present similarly grew enraged at Shifeng's response. They had already offered a huge concession to Zero Wing, a condition that even super guilds wouldn't dream of obtaining, yet Shifeng had still chosen to reject it. This rekindled the various powers' thoughts of annihilating Zero Wing. A fight to the death. Shaking his head, Shifeng said, Guild leader Dawn, you're over-exaggerating things. In my eyes, it is, at most, negligible losses. Good. Since you wish to remain stubborn, you have only yourself to blame, Guild leader Black Flame. Brothers, no need to hold back anymore. Dawn Dominance snarled as he glared at Shifeng in anger. Negligible losses. Such arrogance. Shifeng was simply too arrogant. However, just as the Dark World's army was about to advance once more, Shifeng made his move. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Unsheathing Killing Ray, Shifeng executed a forward slash. Lightning slash. A blue lightning bolt promptly streaked through the area before Shifeng. A bystander would also see a pitch-black spatial tear following closely behind the lightning bolt. Without Dawn Dominance noticing, both the lightning bolt and spatial tear brushed past his body. When the lightning bolt disappeared, the dozen or so tier 3 experts in its path instantly lost all their HPs. An 18-meter-tall, level 115 mythic monster standing a short distance behind Dawn Dominance was also sent flying and crashing into a bunch of dark players. For a time, deathly silence filled the battlefield. Chapter 2568, Dark World defeated, Zero Wing flourishes. After a short period of stunned silence, a gabble of confusion erupted as everyone present stared at Shifeng in disbelief. What happened? How did he send a tier 4 summoned creature flying? What did he do? Everyone present had seen Shifeng's actions very clearly. In fact, they even felt that Shifeng had moved very slowly. However, nobody could wrap their heads around what had actually happened. All they had seen was Shifeng executing a forward slash at the empty space before him and releasing a streak of blue light from his sword. And by the time they snapped out of their daze, the Tier 4 summoned creature that stood over 60 yards away from the swordsman was already in the air. He sent a level 115, Tier 4 summoned creature flying with a single hit. Blue Rainbow wore a somber and confused look on her face as she gazed at Shifeng. Just how high are his basic attributes? From previous investigations, she knew that Shifeng possessed ridiculously high basic attributes. Even Rebellious Thunder, who was a demon count and wielded the magic weapon Cruel Darkness, had only a slight edge on Shifeng in this regard. Moreover, that was when Shifeng was in his normal state. In other words, even back then, Shifeng's strength attribute should already rival that of mythic monsters of the same level. Now, however, Shifeng had actually sent a level 115 mythic monster flying with his attack. Something was wrong with this situation. After all, blocking an attack from a mythic monster and sending a mythic monster flying were two entirely different concepts. Unless there was an enormous gap in strength, it was impossible for one to send their opponents flying, yet not only did Shifeng send a mythic monster flying, but it was even a level 115 mythic monster. The current strength he displayed was starkly different from what the reports mentioned. How is this possible? Furious Heart, who was spectating from afar, was similarly stunned by this situation. He had personally witnessed Shifeng's strength before. However, despite so little time having passed since their last meeting, Shifeng could now actually send a level 115 mythic monster flying with his attacks. For a moment, Furious Heart suspected that the main god system was playing a prank on him. With such frightening strength, let alone Tier 3 NPCs, even Tier 4 NPCs would struggle to deal with Shifeng. Needless to say, it would be a fool's dream to hope that a bunch of Tier 4 mythic monsters would defeat him. Monsters generally had very low combat standards. In a situation where the difference in basic attributes was negligible, they would be no different from common monsters in front of even ordinary expert players, let alone a domain realm expert like Shifeng. If all 50+ Tier 4 summoned creatures attacked the swordsman, they would still have an incredibly difficult time inflicting damage on him. Not to mention, Shifeng still had a legion of Tier 3 knights behind him. How did he get so strong? Hell Rush, who stood among Zero Wing's forces, was similarly astounded as he looked at Shifeng. Ever since Netherworld Empire had partnered with Zero Wing, Hell Rush had been following beside Shifeng almost every day. Hence, he had a very good understanding of Shifeng's strength. Moreover, Shifeng had spent much less time grinding than Hell Rush. In fact, Hell Rush had rarely ever seen Shifeng going out to grind for levels as the man was tied down by all sorts of guild affairs. In contrast, Hell Rush had been frantically grinding every day. And thanks to Stone Forest City's help, not only was he close to reaching level 110 already, but he had even replaced 2 pieces of his equipment thus far. He had also achieved considerable progress in unlocking his mana body. Personally, he deemed that the gap in combat power between himself and Shifeng should have shrunk by quite a bit. However, contrary to Hell Rush's belief, not only had the gap in combat power not shrunk, but it had actually grown instead. As for Dawn Dominance, who originally planned to ridicule Shifeng for his arrogance and ignorance, he was stunned by this unexpected development as well. When he saw the Tier 4 summoned creature sprawled on the ground, his mind froze momentarily. Dawn Dominance had known that Shifeng possessed basic attributes rivaling those of mythic monsters and that the man was considered a peerless monster in God's domain. The swordsman definitely wasn't an existence that ordinary experts could hope to contend with, even a group of Tier 3 peak experts wouldn't be his match. However, what was up with the current situation? How was Shifeng just a peerless monster? He was much stronger than even Zero Wing's 9 invincible Tier 3 knights. In fact, killing several hundred of Zero Wing's Tier 3 knights would be much easier than killing Shifeng. At this moment, only Shifeng himself remained unfazed by the latest development. In God's domain, weapons played the biggest role in determining a player's combat power. The Abyssal Blade's recent promotion into a fragmented legendary weapon had boosted Shifeng's strength beyond that of level 115 mythic monsters. With the Ring of Gospel's assistance, which weakened the Dark Army's Tier 4 summoned creatures and improved his own basic attributes by a significant margin, it was only natural that he could send a level 115 mythic monster flying. Guild Leader Dawn, do you still wish to continue? Shi Feng asked the motionless man before him. This time, Shi Feng did not speak that loudly. However, the dark players found his voice unusually ear-piercing and vexing. This was already Shi Feng's second time asking them this question. It was as if he was ridiculing them for their previous mockery of him, and they could not help but wish they could charge forward and kill Shi Feng right now. Humiliation. This was absolute humiliation. Nevertheless, despite feeling greatly humiliated, none of the dark players present dared to speak up. Instead, they all stared at Dawn Dominance in silence. Meanwhile, after Shi Feng repeated his question, an indescribably gloomy expression appeared on Dawn Dominance's face. Black flame. Dawn Dominance gnashed his teeth as he glared at Shi Feng. However, aside from calling out Shi Feng's name, he couldn't think of anything else to say. In this situation, the upper echelons of the Dark World's various powers sympathized with Dawn Dominance despite themselves. Previously, Dawn Dominance's bid to increase world domination's influence in the Dark World through this war had exasperated the various powers present. This was especially true for Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society. Currently, however, both Blue Rainbow and Elder Gold only felt pity for Dawn Dominance. After all, Shi Feng was truly too vicious. By deliberately repeating his question, not only did Shi Feng thoroughly humiliate Dawn Dominance, but Dawn Dominance also had no choice but to stomach this humiliation in silence. Guild Leader Dawn, if you wish to continue fighting, I won't object. Only, the outcome will not be within my control, Shi Feng said and shrugged as he looked at Dawn Dominance's enraged expression, indicating that he had no qualms whatsoever. Upon hearing Shi Feng's words, the upper echelons of the Dark World's various guilds and adventurer teams immediately grew nervous, and they all sent meaningful looks at Dawn Dominance. The Zero Wing members and various superpowers spectating experts present gaped in shock at this sight. The Dark World that had once stricken fear into the main continent's various superpowers was now timorous after a few words from Shi Feng. If they were to retell today's tale, nobody would believe them. However, it had happened right before their very eyes. Of course, the various superpowers experts could sympathize with the Dark World's players. The current battle involved the foundations of both sides. If the Dark Army perished, then the Dark World's various powers would lose all the fruits of their efforts, with nothing to show for it. This definitely wasn't an outcome they could accept. Guild Leader Black Flame, I admit that you are very powerful. The Dark World will give up on this teleportation gate. However, don't think you can feel pleased for long. You won't be able to defend this teleportation gate forever. Dawn Dominance said after taking in a deep breath. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. As soon as Dawn Dominance finished speaking, he turned around and walked back to the teleportation gate. He had no intention of staying in Cold Spring Forest for even a moment longer. Upon seeing this, the members of the Dark World's powers promptly withdrew to the Dark World as well. None of them chose to remain in Cold Spring Forest. Only a few independent players decided to stay behind and take a look at the situation. Zero Wing won, just like that. Purple Rakshasa was stunned when she saw the Dark World's various powers retreating. For a moment, she felt as if she was dreaming. Against an entire world's experts, Zero Wing had actually emerged victorious. Chapter 2569, Gathering for Nothing. Cold Spring Forest, Stone Forest City. As news of the Dark World's teleportation gates opening had already spread across the entire Cold Spring Forest, the tension in Stone Forest City had increased, and many of the city's resident players had decided to leave and develop somewhere else. This development left the once bustling city quiet. Stone Forest City's previously crowded main street now had less than half the players it originally did. Moreover, it was only because of the newly established Freedom Hotel that this many players chose to remain in the city. However, the majority of these players were actually experts belonging to the various major powers. Very few were independent players. At this time, a group of cloaked players entered the Freedom Hotel's first-floor lobby, the appearance of these players triggering loud discussions among the other players there. The reason for the strong reaction was the secret pavilion's experts guiding this group of nearly 100 cloaked players. Standing at the head of the secret pavilion's experts were the well-known Yuan Tiexin and a male half-elf who looked to be in his 40s. Amazing! Who are those people? They're actually being guided by an elder of the secret pavilion. Those people must be big shots of superpowers. I recall that the secret pavilion is a shareholder of Stone Forest City. Now that the Dark Worlds players have entered Cold Spring Forest, Stone Forest City faces a very bleak future. Those cloaked people might be reinforcements the secret pavilion recruited. Reinforcements? What's the point of calling in reinforcements? That's an entire world we're talking about. That's not something any individual superpower can go up against. Even multiple superpowers working together won't be able to stop the Dark World's invasion. The various major powers experts in the lobby were eaten up with curiosity as they discussed the identities of the cloaked experts. Nowadays, Stone Forest City was already a holy land for players who wanted to develop themselves. After all, the city boasted not only an incredibly high mana density but also the Freedom Hotel, which greatly amplified the rate at which players accumulated the double EXP buff. It was even rumored that the Freedom Hotel's top-floor rooms could accelerate the removal of foreign energy from one's body and increase the efficiency of one's training in combat techniques. In the current era, where combat techniques had become more commonly available in God's domain, the Freedom Hotel's functions held a fatal temptation to expert players. If a power could develop their expert players using the Freedom Hotel's functions over long periods, the development speed of said power would reach unimaginable heights. Since the secret pavilion was one of Stone Forest City's shareholders, the guild naturally wouldn't give up on the city without a fight. Only, now that the Dark World's teleportation gate was open, the various major powers experts found it inconceivable that any power could stop the Dark World's players. Please wait a moment. I'll go rent an advanced reception room, Yuan Tiexin said to the cloaked players behind him. He went up to the front desk and presented a gold card to the receptionist there. And upon seeing the card, the various major powers' upper echelons were green with envy. The Freedom Hotel's gold membership card. Due to the Freedom Hotel's amazing functions, the various major powers all sought membership in the Freedom Hotel, the higher, the better. However, doing so was incredibly difficult. Even now, those major powers had managed to gain only a bronze membership. If they wished to elevate their membership status to silver, they would need to accumulate a large number of contribution points in the Freedom Hotel, which could be acquired only by selling rare materials and doing quests. Moreover, each player could sell only a limited amount of materials per day. Meanwhile, a gold membership allowed players to rent the rooms on the Freedom Hotel's top floor. While Yuan Tiexin was handling the rental procedures, the cloaked players standing behind him studied the Freedom Hotel's interior. So, this is Zero Wing's Freedom Hotel. This place really is amazing, said a cloaked, male youth radiating dense darkness energy. He sighed ruefully when he sensed the density of the mana inside the hotel and the mana's effects. It's no wonder Zero Wing dared to offend our guild before. So what if Zero Wing dared to offend us? In the end, Zero Wing still lost to Vice Guild leader Light, a level 109 elementalist standing beside the male youth and similarly radiating darkness energy said disdainfully. This time, the secret pavilion had not only taken the initiative to invite the various superpowers that Demon's Heart had secretly partnered up with but also extended an invitation to Demon's Heart. One could easily imagine the direness of Zero Wing's current situation. Unfortunately, even if the secret pavilion stepped forward this time, it couldn't do much to change the outcome of this war, as the various superpowers present were hell-bent on obtaining Stone Forest City. As the two experts from Demon's Heart quietly conversed with each other, Illusory Words, who similarly stood among the cloaked players, wore a frown on her face. Illusory, it seems the chances of Zero Wing surviving are slim. So many superpowers have actually gathered to obtain Stone Forest City. I doubt even the secret pavilion expected such a development, the fierce man standing beside Illusory Words said, sighing. The secret pavilion had invited all the superpowers targeting Stone Forest City to the negotiations. Crimson Emperor had estimated that 6 or 7 superpowers, at most, had their eye on Stone Forest City. However, the actual number turned out to be more than 10. Even Battle Wolves, which had an irreconcilable feud with Demon's Heart, had decided to join in the fray. If these superpowers banded together, they would have a minimum of 4,000 Tier 3 experts with very high combat standards. If they worked together with the Dark World's forces and attacked Stone Forest City from both the inside and outside, Stone Forest City wouldn't stand a chance. Of course, the fierce man could also understand why the various superpowers were willing to go to such lengths to obtain Stone Forest City. After all, the advantages the city brought were simply amazing. This was especially true for the Freedom Hotel. No superpower would pass up the Freedom Hotel's benefits. Moreover, Zero Wing had even taken the initiative to meet the Dark World's army at the teleportation gate. That was simply suicide. Now, even if all of the 5 great super guilds banded together, they still wouldn't be able to save Zero Wing. At this moment, let alone illusory words and the fierce man from Crimson Emperor, even Yuan Tiexin, who had invited the various superpowers secretly targeting Stone Forest City, was surprised by this situation. He never thought that there would be more than 10 superpowers targeting Stone Forest City this time. Aside from Demon's Heart and Starlink, which bore deep hatred for Zero Wing, the superpowers included the 10 Saints Empire's Demon Palace, the Shadow World's Shadowless Empire, and the Super Guilds Battle Wolves and Pantheon. Not to mention, Mythology, one of the 5 great super guilds, which wasn't present among the superpowers he invited, was sure to be taking action in secret against Stone Forest City as well. If all these superpowers worked together, they could shake the entire eastern continent, what more a measly Stone Forest City. For a moment, Yuan Tiexin could not help but doubt if the negotiations this time would truly yield any results. Ha ha ha. Zero Wing is doomed now. Troubled Times, who had come with flaming light, could not help but grow ecstatic as he took in the various superpowers representatives around him. With so many superpowers gathered here, even a super guild won't be able to stop the upcoming assault. Previously, when Shifeng had publicly executed Troubled Times in Demon City, not only did Troubled Times' strength diminish greatly, but his reputation in the Dark Den had also fallen into ruin. Originally, Troubled Times thought that he wouldn't have an opportunity to get revenge on Zero Wing. However, his chance had come so quickly. Everyone, the reception room is ready. Please follow me, Yuan Tiexin said to the cloaked group behind him. However, just as Yuan Tiexin was about to lead the group to the Freedom Hotel's top-floor reception room, a figure suddenly appeared before him. The other players present in the lobby gaped in shock at the development. The players the secret pavilion invited might be hiding their identities, but they had not done anything to conceal their auras, and their auras made it clear that every one of these people was a peak expert or above. Anyone that dared to stand in their path had to be tired of living. However, someone actually dared to do so. Moreover, this person was a woman wearing Zero Wing's emblem, and her level was only a pitiful 100. Miss Melancholic, do you have business with us? Yuan Tiexin asked in confusion. He had recognized this woman immediately. This woman was none other than Melancholic Smile, the manager of Zero Wing's candlelight trading firm as well as one of the Freedom Hotel's managers. Yuan Tiexin had not intentionally tried to conceal the fact that he had invited the various superpowers for negotiations. And in his opinion, Zero Wing should have no reason whatsoever to stop him from doing so. After all, the secret pavilion was one of Stone Forest City's shareholders, and negotiating with the various superpowers could reduce the number of enemies Zero Wing would have to face. Now, however, Melancholic Smile had suddenly appeared before their group. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. It's nothing important, Melancholic Smile said, shaking her head. I'm just following the guild leader's instructions to relay a message to these people. Relay a message? Is he taking the initiative to hand over Stone Forest City's shares now that he knows he can't win? Troubled Times asked, laughing in ridicule. Upon hearing Troubled Times' words, the various superpowers experts present also started laughing. With things having reached this point already, wasn't it a little too late for regrets? Our guild leader has stated that if you wish to develop in Stone Forest City with peace in mind, then Zero Wing will welcome you with open arms. However, if you wish to meddle in Stone Forest City's affairs, you'd best return to wherever you came from instead of asking for trouble. Melancholic Smile declared calmly as she swept her gaze across the players before her. Chapter 2570, On the Verge of War, Crazy Zero Wing. At first, the players in the lobby had paid close attention to the mysterious group Yuan Tiexin had invited, and Melancholic Smile hadn't tried to keep her voice down. Hence, after her declaration, silence had fallen in the hotel lobby as everyone stared at her in astonishment. What's going on? Those people must be big shots from the various superpowers, yet she dares to speak to them like that? Amazing. Truly amazing. Even now, Zero Wing still behaves so haughtily. Since the day I joined God's domain, I've never seen such a suicidal guild. None of these players were fools, and even though they hid themselves under black cloaks, the individuals Yuan Tiexin had invited were clearly from the various superpowers. Moreover, they should be the superpowers' top-ranked experts based on their auras. Now that the Dark World's teleportation gate was active, it would only be a matter of time before dark players flooded into Cold Spring Forest. The entire level 100 neutral map was in danger, as was Stone Forest City. Yet, even in such a dire predicament, Zero Wing continued to maintain its arrogance before the various superpowers. This was just insane. Miss Melancholic, what are you? Yuan Tiexin was flabbergasted. He couldn't believe what was happening. If he hadn't been certain that Melancholic Smile wasn't some spy and an actual core member in Zero Wing, who had worked her way up the ranks, he would have suspected otherwise. Her announcement was practically a dare to the various superpowers and would undoubtedly lead to Zero Wing's elimination from Cold Spring Forest. What are Zero Wing's intentions, old Yuan? Scorching Shine asked from beside Yuan Tiexin with a frosty look. He had already surmised that the chances of their plan succeeding were very low. Stone Forest City's Freedom Hotel was too tempting to give up, after all. However, it was also the reason that the secret pavilion didn't want other superpowers to stick their fingers in the city. Unfortunately, Melancholic Smile's statement had as good as ruined their plan. No one would be surprised if the various superpowers shed all pretenses with Zero Wing immediately, let alone negotiate. For a moment, Yuan Tiexin was speechless. Cold Spring Forest was a lost cause at this point. Even the various superpowers would have a hard time developing in the area, much less Zero Wing. There was simply no way Zero Wing could retain absolute control over Stone Forest City. It'd be a miracle if the guild even kept a portion of the city. Yuan Tiexin had worked with Shifeng many times before, so he knew the swordsman was open to persuasion, not coercion. If he insisted that Shifeng gave away a significant portion of the city's shares, their discussion would end on a sour note. Knowing this, he hadn't bothered to contact Shifeng before his negotiation with the various superpowers. He would only try to convince Shifeng once the negotiations had reached a satisfying conclusion. With things as they were now, Zero Wing would have to sacrifice some of Stone Forest City's shares if it wished to survive. Maintaining full control was impossible. But Yuan Tiexin had never considered that Shifeng would be ruthless enough to send Melancholic Smile to disrespect the various superpowers so blatantly. He had definitely gone insane this time. Ha ha ha. Interesting. Zero Wing is truly fascinating. Even now, it displays such confidence. It's no wonder why it dares to offend so many superpowers. It seems my visit to Stone Forest City wasn't a waste. An elderly, crimson-eyed man wearing the Shadowless Empire's emblem and holding a scarlet staff said, laughing. Old Lu, do you think Zero Wing is just putting on a brave face? Evil Qilin, who wore Demon Palace's emblem and carried a war axe that radiated strange energy, asked, sneering at the crimson-browed elder. Zero Wing is digging its own grave by provoking us. I think you still have a grudge over losing to Black Flame, Qilin, the crimson-eyed elder shot back, chuckling at the glare Evil Qilin directed his way. Instead of rising to the crimson-eyed elder's teasing, Evil Qilin simply smiled as he said, the situation on Dragonheart Island is one thing, but we're in Cold Spring Forest. Moreover, this won't be some small team battle in the fields. We're talking about a conflict with an entire otherworld. Zero Wing hasn't tried to win us over, but has sent some nobody to spit in our faces. If that isn't stupidity, what is? Demon Palace's other members nodded in agreement. Due to Zero Wing, Demon Palace's reputation on Dragonheart Island had suffered, but this situation was completely different. More than 10 superpowers had gathered in Stone Forest City. Even without including the Dark World's players, there were more than enough hostile players to end Zero Wing's reign. Instead of negotiating for peace, Zero Wing has sent someone to slap the gathered superpowers in the face. The guild must be giving up. After a brief moment of silence, Troubled Time's smile grew into a grin. He then walked up to Melancholic Smile without any hesitation. Lady from Zero Wing, we're here precisely to cause trouble. What are you going to do about it? Troubled Times asked, raising his voice deliberately to ensure that every player in the lobby heard him. Hearing Troubled Times' threat, an uproar shook the lobby. What? Are the various superpowers really going to fight Zero Wing? Zero Wing asked for it. We may be in Stone Forest City, but do you think the various superpowers would let such intentional disrespect slide? Zero Wing truly is doomed now. Now, not only does it have to deal with the Dark World's invasion, but it will also have to face the various superpowers' wrath. The experts that recently joined Zero Wing must deeply regret their decisions. The various major powers members started chatting amongst themselves as they watched the tense conversation play out. They could hardly believe Zero Wing's behavior. None of them had expected the guild to shed all pretenses before the various superpowers representatives. While everyone expected Melancholic Smile to panic, however, she smiled brightly at Troubled Times and replied, if that's the case, Zero Wing will have no choice but to erase you from Cold Spring Forest. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU again, the lobby fell deathly silent. Melancholic Smile's response even stunned Troubled Times. He couldn't understand why she was so bold. Wasn't she supposed to grovel at his feet and beg for mercy? It seems your instincts were wrong this time, Illusory. That girl is just as insane as her guild leader. She's only pushing Zero Wing further down the path of no return, the fierce man from Crimson Emperor said, admiring Melancholic Smile's bravery. Every one of the various superpowers representatives wanted to declare war on Zero Wing that moment. They hadn't found a good excuse to attack Stone Forest City yet, but Zero Wing had just given them the reason they had been searching for. The fierce man looked over, expecting to see Illusory words bitter after misjudging Zero Wing, but he saw that she maintained a neutral expression, focused on a message she had just received. After a moment, she looked up and took a deep breath before informing her companion, my instincts might have been wrong, but her statement isn't. Chapter 2571, Astonished once more, Hotel in an uproar, what do you mean? Illusory words statement confused her fierce comrade from Crimson Emperor. What did she mean by her instincts had been wrong, but Melancholic Smile wasn't? The current situation was clear for all to see, and Illusory words had acknowledged that she had misjudged Zero Wing. How could Melancholic Smile's statement possibly be correct? Zero Wing was struggling to survive. Chasing the various superpowers out of Cold Spring Forest from such a position was a joke. To be precise, my instincts were only partially correct, Illusory words explained, chuckling at the fierce man's confused look. It's best if you take a look for yourself. I just received this message from Graceful Monarch. Graceful Monarch? Has something unexpected happened at the teleportation gate? Curious, the fierce man opened the message Illusory words had forwarded. Graceful Monarch and Purple Rakshasa had wanted to see the Dark World's teleportation gate themselves and get a clear grasp of the invading army's strength. Zero Wing had also dispatched quite a few players to the gate, and by allowing the two Dark Den players to spectate, they'd find out exactly what Zero Wing intended. In his opinion, Zero Wing was wasting its time in trying to negotiate with the Dark World's various powers, especially once they'd seen the benefits Cold Spring Forest and Stone Forest City had to offer. Regardless of what the guild tried to offer, the outcome wouldn't change. Retaining a small fraction of the city's shares was the best Zero Wing could hope for. It shouldn't dream of holding more power than that. The Dark World's invading army had more than 30,000 Tier 3 experts. No individual power would have the strength to stand up against that. While the fierce man carefully read Graceful Monarch's message, more players had begun to gather in the Freedom Hotel. A large number of independent experts had come to hear what Melancholic Smile had to say. Did she get the wrong message? Dropping all pretense with the various superpowers would only bring Zero Wing more harm. Stone Forest City might not even last 3 days at this rate, much less a week. Galaxy Past, who had just arrived in the Freedom Hotel's lobby, gaped in shock when he heard about Melancholic Smile's interaction with the superpowers representatives. Every player in the city was paying attention to the current situation Zero Wing and Cold Spring Forest faced. Although word of the various superpowers moving against Stone Forest City had long since reached the masses, Galaxy Past still had a hard time believing that Zero Wing would take the initiative to offend the various superpowers. He, too, knew that Zero Wing would never bend to coercion, only persuasion. He also knew that the guild was insane and acted no differently than a gambling addict. Although Zero Wing's crazy bets had been astonishingly successful thus far, its current opponent was on a completely different level than those it had faced before. If Zero Wing moved against the various superpowers now, it would be caught in a dead end. Zero Wing was no longer the guild it had been. It had nearly as many resources and as much territory as the various superpowers. If the guild could stabilize its hold in Stone Forest City and continue to develop in peace, it would only be a matter of time before it became another of God's domain's superpowers. While Galaxy Past found Melancholic Smile's actions perplexing, Demon's Heart's members began to laugh. Troubled Time's laughter, in particular, rang throughout the lobby. He looked at Melancholic Smile as if she were a fool. Truthfully, not even he had expected this development. He had believed this woman would have tried to explain away her statement as a misunderstanding. He had never dreamed that she'd pit herself against the various superpowers directly, removing any room for negotiation. Now that Melancholic Smile had offended the various superpowers, their reputations would suffer if they didn't respond appropriately. Lady from Zero Wing, you certainly are bold. Would you truly kick us out of Cold Spring Forest if we choose to ignore Zero Wing's threat? Do you assume we won't eliminate you just because Zero Wing is the only established guild in Cold Spring Forest? Troubled Times asked, sneering at Melancholic Smile. With things as they were, he didn't mind adding fuel to the fire, ensuring that any trace of Zero Wing would be removed from Cold Spring Forest. It's still going to come down to a fight in the end? Yuan Tianxin could not help his bitter smile at Melancholic Smile's fearlessness. Personally, Yuan Tianxin admired Zero Wing's future and Shifeng's strength. Moreover, the secret pavilion had gained quite a bit from its partnership with this guild. Hence, he wished to help Zero Wing in any way he could. However, it seemed his recent efforts were for naught. Just as Yuan Tianxin was about to give up and try to find another way to deal with the gathered superpowers, a voice called out from a group of cloaked players, echoing throughout the hotel lobby. Excuse me, Miss Melancholic, but unlike the other superpowers, Battle Wolves is only here in hopes of allying with Zero Wing. I'd like to avoid a misunderstanding. Everyone in the lobby spun to look at the speaker. Several players broke away from the group and removed their black cloaks to reveal their true appearances. A middle-aged man led the small party. It was none other than Sirius, one of the Battle Wolves' 4 great wolf kings. Crap. Battle Wolves has come, too. Sure enough, those cloaked players all have powerful backgrounds, but what is Sirius trying to do? He really doesn't plan to target Stone Forest City. Zero Wing is so lucky. Or maybe the guild has a secret relationship with Battle Wolves, so they've decided to give up on this struggle. Sirius's interruption stunned the players in the lobby. No one had thought that Battle Wolves, a super guild, would forsake the contest for Stone Forest City. Battle Wolves, huh? Even Yuan Tianxin was slightly surprised by Sirius's admission, yet he could understand the reason behind it. Battle Wolves and Demon's Heart had an irreconcilable feud. Since Demon's Heart was moving against Zero Wing, it was only natural that Battle Wolves would interfere. Stepping forward to side with Zero Wing was well within reason. On the other hand, Troubled Times and his Demon's Heart companions were particularly surprised to hear Sirius's declaration. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, after all. As Troubled Times and the others assumed the minor interlude had concluded, another player spoke up from among the crowd. Greetings, Miss Melancholic. Crimson Emperor is here to negotiate with Zero Wing, as well. That is our only intention. Those who have spoken out against your guild only represent certain powers. They have no bearing on Crimson Emperor's will, illusory words announced as she stepped forward. For a moment, everyone in the lobby fell silent. What's going on? Crimson Emperor stands by Zero Wing's side, too. Not only had Battle Wolves declared its intentions to ally with Zero Wing, but Crimson Emperor had, as well. Everyone's eyes nearly fell out of their sockets. Has Crimson Emperor gone mad? Troubled Times stared at illusory words and her entourage in confusion. While he could understand Battle Wolf's decision, he couldn't even fathom what drove Crimson Emperor. Crimson Emperor was neither a friend of Zero Wing's nor Demon's Heart's enemy, yet it was showing strong support for the former. The situation was baffling. Of course, while the two guilds allying themselves with Zero Wing was unexpected, it wouldn't affect the overall situation. Before anyone could overcome their surprise, however, several more players spoke up from among the cloaked group. Shadowless Empire also wishes to form a partnership. We have only come here with this group due to Old Yuan's invitation. Young lady from Zero Wing, please, do not misinterpret our intentions, the Crimson-Eyed Elder from Shadowless Empire declared, stepping away from the group. You really are a sleaze, Old Lu. You make it sound as if Demon Palace has some other reason for being here, Evil Qilin said, similarly removing himself from the group as he rolled his eyes at the Crimson-Eyed Elder. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. After the representatives from Shadowless Empire and Demon Palace declared their desire for peace, the other representatives, aside from those from Demon's Heart and Starlink, did the same, insisting to Melancholic Smile that they were only there to seek an alliance with her guild, nothing else. The various major powers members and independent players in the Freedom Hotel's lobby were dumbfounded as they watched the scene play out. What's going on? What has Zero Wing done? Even Yuan Tiexin and Troubled Times watched with their jaws hanging open. They had no idea what was happening, either. Chapter 2572, Stone Forest City shaken, darkness disappears. The situation even confused Melancholic Smile, to say nothing of Yuan Tiexin and Troubled Times. Only a moment ago, these superpowers representatives had been silent, but based on their imposing auras, they had harbored no intentions of allying with Zero Wing. They now displayed a completely different attitude. Before Troubled Times could say anything to these representatives, a hand shot out and stopped him. His mouth clicked shut as he glanced at Flaming Light in confusion. We're leaving. Flaming Light snapped after one last glance at Melancholic Smile. He turned and left the Freedom Hotel without another word. He made no attempts to win back the various superpowers. Are we just going to let Zero Wing off the hook, Vice Guild Leader? Troubled Times whispered to Flaming Light. They had gone to great lengths to gather so many superpowers. Combined with the Dark World's forces, Stone Forest City, even at intermediate rank, was a fish on the cutting board. Most of the superpowers they had gathered may have abandoned the plan to attack Stone Forest City, but they could still cause enough trouble to cost Zero Wing a fortune and accelerate the city's downfall with Starlink, Demon's Heart, and the adventurer team's mythology controlled, even if they couldn't deal a severe blow. Fool! Do you think those superpowers would suddenly change their minds without a reason? Flaming Light growled as he glared at Troubled Times. Have they unearthed some sort of unexpected information? Troubled Times wondered, realization dawning on him. Those superpowers are all sly foxes. No ordinary news could make them change sides so drastically. Something big must have happened with the Dark World, Flaming Light hissed. Something's happened to the Dark World? How is that possible? Troubled Times could not help his skepticism. The Dark World was home to powerful lunatics, where the strong preyed upon the weak. If the Dark World's players wanted to enter Cold Spring Forest, there was no power strong enough to stop them, not even Flaming Light, who was responsible for opening the teleportation gate. I'm not sure yet. I could be overthinking things, Flaming Light said, shaking his head. In reality, he found the deduction hard to believe. We need to send someone to investigate immediately. I'll contact Elder Heart right away. Troubled Times said, nodding. Even after Flaming Light and his entourage left the Freedom Hotel, the lobby was still silent as the various major powers members and independent players remained speechless. Everything had changed too suddenly. A second ago, the various superpowers had been ready to draw their weapons and declare war on Zero Wing, but in the next moment, they voiced their intentions to ally with the guild. The crowd even wondered if those cloaked players were truly upper echelons from the various superpowers or not. What's going on here, Old Yuan? Why are these superpowers behaving like this? Scorching Shine asked, unable to hold back his curiosity any longer. At this moment, Yuan Tianxin was just as confused. He, too, wished to know what had just changed. Yuan Tianxin struggled to find an answer for Scorched Shine's question when he noticed that he had received a message from Purple Jade some time ago. Could Zero Wing have done something? Realization dawned on Yuan Tianxin when he saw the message. When he had heard that Zero Wing had rashly sent a force to the Dark World's teleportation gate, he had sent Purple Jade to investigate the situation. Since she had messaged him, he found it likely that Zero Wing had done something at the gate, which had, in turn, caused this unexpected development. The other superpowers representatives must also have received news, which had changed their minds. Even if Zero Wing has done something, this outcome shouldn't be possible. Yuan Tianxin felt that something was amiss, and he immediately opened Purple Jade's message. By the time he finished reading her report, he was astounded. Old Yuan, what's happened? Did you get disconnected? Scorching Shine asked when he saw his old comrade's slack expression. Not even Scorching Shine's question shook Yuan Tianxin from his daze. He only opened his mouth after some time and stuttered, They won. Zero Wing actually won. Zero Wing won. What did it win? Scorching Shine prodded. Zero Wing won the Dark World. After taking in a deep breath, Yuan Tianxin clearly explained, Zero Wing just won the Dark World at the teleportation gate. Won the Dark World? Yuan Tianxin's abnormal behavior baffled Scorching Shine. The man was, after all, utterly incoherent. Did he have Alzheimer's? For a moment, Scorching Shine thought it might be time to suggest to his guild leader that Yuan Tianxin take a vacation. Brother Shine, I apologize. I got too excited, Yuan Tianxin apologized when he realized that Scorching Shine was looking at him like a mental patient. Chuckling, he explained, a few minutes ago, Zero Wing led a legion of Tier 3 NPCs and repelled the Dark World's invading army. Dawn Dominance, World Domination's guild leader and the Dark World's representative, has publicly announced their retreat. Zero Wing has taken full control of the Dark World's teleportation gate. Zero Wing has defeated the Dark World's invading army. Are you toying with me, Old Yuan? Scorching Shine questioned, giving Yuan Tianxin a disdainful look. Since Yuan Tianxin hadn't controlled his voice, everyone in the lobby had heard him clearly. A commotion erupted, and the various major powers experts and independent players stared at Yuan Tianxin as if he were a blubbering fool. No individual power in God's domain was capable of standing against the Dark World's invading army. Although Zero Wing had a large number of Tier 3 NPCs under its command, that only amounted to 600. Trying to stop more than 30,000 Tier 3 players with a measly 600 Tier 3 NPCs was a joke. Even if they included every Tier 3 player in Zero Wing, the guild should have no hope of stopping the Dark World's invading army. Furthermore, the various powers that called the Dark World home had extraordinary powers. If they all revealed just one of their many trump cards, they could easily annihilate every player in Cold Spring Forest 10 times over. With such strength, how could Zero Wing possibly defeat this invading army? I knew you wouldn't believe me. Here, take a look. This is the battle video Jade recorded, Yuan Tianxin said, shaking his head helplessly. Yuan Tiexin found the situation just as unbelievable, but with the facts before him, he had no choice but to recognize it as truth. Scorching Shine then watched the video Yuan Tiexin sent him. Silence. Shock. This. How is this possible? Scorching Shine couldn't believe his eyes. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. They were talking about several million expert players. He also saw several dozen Tier 4 summoned creatures and several thousand Tier 3 personal guards. Yet, even with such power, the Dark World's invading army had suffered defeat. Shortly after the video ended, a group of players entered the Freedom Hotel's lobby in a hurry, clearly excited. Big news, everyone. Great news. Zero Wings just repelled the Dark World's invading army and has taken control of the Dark World's teleportation gate. Chapter 2573, Popular Stone Forest City. When the group that had just burst into the Freedom Hotel excitedly announced Zero Wings' victory of the Dark World's invading army, the players in the lobby, who had been skeptical about Yuan Tiexin's stunned announcement, were flabbergasted. What? It's actually true. How could Zero Wing have possibly won? We're talking about an entire world of experts. The fact that the secret pavilion held some of Stone Forest City's shares was no longer a secret. Thus, there had been a chance that Yuan Tiexin had been lying to boost Zero Wing's reputation. The players that had just arrived, however, were a different story. Every member of the group was an independent player, and a few of them were well known among the adventurer teams unrelated to Zero Wing in the city. Because of this, they were considered quite credible. Most importantly, they had just explained the sudden change in the various superpowers' attitudes regarding Zero Wing. Even with many players still doubting the news, assuming it was either a lie or outrageously exaggerated, there was no doubt that the guild in question had done something to change the superpowers' minds. That fact alone was enough to shock everyone in the lobby only moments before they were overcome with joy. Without the various superpowers' interference and with Stone Forest City's defenses and terrain advantage, even the Dark World's players would need a long time before they could capture the city. Meanwhile, resident players like themselves could safely and far faster than those based outside of Stone Forest City. Thankfully, we weren't too rash, but I really doubt that Zero Wing's foundations are this formidable. Demon's Heart's flaming light must be going mad with regret right about now, the fierce man from Crimson Emperor said with a bitter smile. The main reason that the various superpowers were so afraid of Demon's Heart was the key in Flaming Light's possession, which allowed him to open the Dark World's teleportation gate in any location he desired. If not for this trump card, Demon's Heart wouldn't have developed so smoothly in the Ten Saints Empire. Flaming Light had intended to use this trump card to salvage Demon's Heart's reputation and deter the Ten Saints Empire's various superpowers, but now, both his threat and plans had gone to the dogs. In fact, Flaming Light's trump card had unexpectedly benefited Zero Wing, increasing both the guild's fame and fortune. It was only a matter of time before word of the Dark World's defeat spread across the main continent, and as it did, everyone would learn about Zero Wing. Not even the various superpowers were capable of accomplishing such a feat, yet Zero Wing had succeeded. Although the guild had relied on a large number of Tier 3 NPCs to do so, those NPCs were considered a part of Zero Wing's strength. In addition, with the Dark World's teleportation gate under Zero Wing's control, even ordinary players knew this victory would usher in an era of power for the guild. No one would be surprised if it instantly became a superpower in its own right. And the one who granted Zero Wing this opportunity was none other than Demon's Heart's flaming light. That's right. Without the Dark World's assistance, Demon's Heart will have a very hard time expanding in the Ten Saints Empire, Illusory Words agreed, nodding. Demon's Heart had gone out for wool and come home shorn. The Dark World's teleportation gate should have triggered unprecedented change on the main continent. However, Zero Wing now controlled the gate, and the guild had made it clear that it intended to collect a fee from every player that wanted to use the teleportation gate. This would significantly decrease the number of visiting Dark World players and, in turn, reduce the number of Demon's Heart's potential allies. Unless the Dark Guild wanted to face the Ten Saints Empire's various superpowers, it would have to keep a low profile for a considerable amount of time. You've done a great job this time, Illusory. Since the Grand Elders had nearly made such a catastrophic mistake, the guild leader has reclaimed a lot of authority in the guild. The guild leader sent a message ago requesting that you represent Crimson Emperor in the negotiations with Zero Wing. It would also be best if you could rent a few of the Freedom Hotel's rooms long-term. Don't worry about the required money and materials, the fierce man congratulated his comrade. The guild leader's requests are certainly troublesome. Now that Zero Wing has defeated the Dark World, a ton of powers will try to rent a large number of the hotel rooms, Illusory Words grumbled, offering a half-hearted smile. With Cold Spring Forest now free of the Dark World's threat, Stone Forest City was, once again, a sacred leveling ground. It would soon become a holy city for the Eastern Continent's various powers and independent players, and when it did, even entering the city would become a challenge, let alone renting one of the Freedom Hotel's rooms. Shortly after the various superpowers meeting in the first-floor lobby had concluded, news of the Dark World's defeat spread throughout the continent. As they learned of the event, many powers began to regret their decision to abandon Stone Forest City the moment things had turned south. Crap! How is this even possible? Zero Wing is so awesome. Even an entire other world of players is helpless against that guild. Who could possibly stand against it? Stone Forest City. It seems like a good place to develop. When the various kingdoms and empires' powers and independent experts learned about Zero Wing's victory, many of them considered moving their bases of operations to Stone Forest City. Aside from the fact that Stone Forest City occupied a level 100 neutral map, the fact that the Dark World's invading army hadn't been able to shake Zero Wing's foundations made the city incredibly valuable. None of the city's residents would have to worry about suddenly losing their bases or another power taking over, which would render all of their investments useless. This concern was precisely the reason that many players developed in NPC cities, rather than in guild cities. Now that Zero Wing had affirmed its strength, Stone Forest City's stability wasn't a concern. At the very least, it would be a long while before any power could bring harm to the city. This time period would be more than enough for players to earn back what they had invested in the city. For a time, players from various kingdoms and empires swarmed towards Stone Forest City. The abrupt population boom was easily 10 times larger than the initial wave of players that visited the city once it had reached intermediate rank. Moreover, an astounding number of players had begun to apply to the guild. Zero Wing had already received more than 2 million applicants among its various branches, with many of these experts capable of reaching the Trial Tower's 5th floor and beyond. Gentle Snow, Aqua Rose, and Zero Wing's other management personnel were stupefied. No matter how well they had managed Zero Wing in the past, few new experts had applied to join, yet after a single battle, everything had changed. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Guild Leader, Stone Forest City's player population has exceeded 8 million, and I believe even more players are on their way. Should we slightly raise the city's entrance fee? Aqua Rose asked, still blissful after reading the latest statistics report. Their war with the Dark World had ended less than half a day ago, yet Stone Forest City's player population had risen from less than 2 million to over 8 million. The number of players visiting the city had completely exceeded her expectations. No, let's forget about increasing the entrance fee. We still need a large number of independent players to settle down in Stone Forest City. However, we can increase the Freedom Hotel's prices. Don't normal rooms cost 30 silver per day? Raise it to 1 gold. Bronze members will get a 10% discount, silver members will get 20%, and gold members will get 30%, Shifeng decided, chuckling. Nothing in this world came for free. Since the various powers wanted their experts to develop as quickly as possible, he wouldn't be courteous. He was incredibly poor right now, after all. To arm his night division, he had spent almost all of the money he had. I understand. The pricing astonished Aqua Rose a little. Not even ordinary experts could afford a daily expense of 1 gold. Ah, right. Guild Leader, Dark Rhapsody, and Deity Society have contacted me and wish to discuss the offer you made them. They're asking when you'll be free to speak on the matter. Chapter 2574, Ancient Gods Tower Stone Forest City, Freedom Hotel's top floor reception room. Blue Rainbow from Dark Rhapsody and Elder Gold from Deity Society sat on a sofa, an awkward silence between them, in a spacious, luxurious reception room. Magic Flash and Old Forest sat beside them, just as dazed. This was simply too humiliating. They had thought that their previous meeting with Shifeng would have been their last, and they would never have to see each other again. They had seen Shifeng's hope of a stronger partnership between their guilds as nothing more than wishful thinking. However, less than 2 days after that meeting, they had sought the swordsman out again. Meanwhile, Shifeng had transformed his brazen declaration into reality, taking control of the Dark World's teleportation gate and the Otherworld's lifeline. If any of the Dark World's powers or players wanted to continue and accelerate their development, they'd have to travel to Cold Spring Forest. However, Zero Wing's teleportation fees were just fraudulent. The guild actually charged 1 darkness crystal or similarly attributed magic crystal per person. Attributed magic crystals were even rarer than ordinary magic crystals, and dark players needed darkness crystals for their growth. In fact, they needed a lot of them. There weren't even enough darkness crystals to go around for the Dark World's various powers and independent players, yet Zero Wing was cruel enough to charge darkness crystals as its teleportation fee. Worse yet, they couldn't defeat Zero Wing. To secure its hold on the teleportation gate, Zero Wing had established a permanent magic barrier around it, in addition to stationing 2 Crimson Dragon flying ships, 8 combat puppets, 600 Tier 3 knights, and 2,000 Tier 2 knights to guard the gate. The defenses Zero Wing had set up around the teleportation gate were maddening. Sending an army of 20,000 Tier 3 experts would be futile against such high security, much less sneaking through. The only option the Dark World's powers and players had left was to hand over the required fee obediently. After Blue Rainbow and the others waited for a while, the reception room's doors opened abruptly, and Zero Wing's guild leader, Black Flame, walked in. He was the monster that had single-handedly deterred the Dark World's army of several million players. However, Shifeng seemed like a completely different person at the moment. When he had stood before the Dark World's teleportation gate, he had radiated an incredible aura that frightened everyone in his presence, but now, they couldn't even detect the hint of an aura as if he were just an ordinary player. Similar to Blue Rainbow and the others' first meeting with this swordsman, he seemed harmless. Rather than contempt, however, they only looked at Shifeng with fear in their eyes. They hadn't paid much attention to him during their last meeting, but now that they did, they couldn't even consider Shifeng as human. He felt more like a plant, nearly non-existent. As Blue Rainbow and Elder Gold began to stand to greet him, Shifeng gestured for them to remain seated, dispensing with the formalities. He then smiled and asked, "I've heard that you've conveyed my proposal to your respective guild leaders. How do your guilds wish to cooperate with Zero Wing?" Magic Flash and Old Forest inwardly rolled their eyes at Shifeng's question. His actions had practically engraved his words on their guild leaders' bones, and they'd remember them for the rest of their lives. Guild leader Black Flame, your proposal has delighted our guild leaders, and they have stated that as long as Zero Wing will waive the teleportation fees for our guild members, we will help the Candlelight trading firm establish itself in the Dark World's major NPC cities. What do you think? Blue Rainbow asked. Although their 2 guilds were reluctant to accept Shifeng's conditions, they had no choice with the situation weighing against them. If they declined, both of their guilds' positions would become more disadvantageous as time passed. Waive the teleportation fee. After giving the matter some thought, Shifeng said, "That's fine, but I'd like to set up a branch shop in every NPC city in the Dark World. Of course, Zero Wing will cover the necessary expenditures. Your 2 guilds only need to resolve the issue of land." Guild leader Black Flame, you are asking for the impossible. The Dark World is even larger than the main continent's ancient empires. While our guilds are 2 of the top 3 in the Dark World, we only control a small portion of the Otherworld. We simply don't have the manpower and resources to ensure that Candlelight can operate in every NPC city, Elder Gold said, shaking his head with an unhappy smile. Dark Rhapsody, Deity Society, and world domination had a lot of influence on the surface, but the same couldn't be said for their control on the Dark World. In the Dark World, players had partial control of the various NPC cities. As long as a power controlled one of these cities, they wouldn't have to worry about needing funds or resources, and without these concerns, they didn't have to worry about offending the other world's top 3 guilds. To put it simply, helping Candlelight secure branches in the Dark World's major NPC cities was a colossal challenge. Both guilds would have to pull a lot of strings to fulfill their end of the bargain. Unfortunately, helping the trading firm set up shops in every NPC city would be a dream. Even if world domination cooperated, the feat wouldn't be feasible. There is something else we need to inform you about, Guild Leader Black Flame, Blue Rainbow said. Due to your actions at the teleportation gate, the Dark World's various major powers loathe Zero Wing. As a result, our guilds are risking much by allying with your guild. Moreover, Demon's Heart has traveled across the Dark World, secretly persuading the various powers to join its alliance. By the looks of it, they plan to challenge the Ancient God's Tower in the Dark World. This Ancient God's Tower is extraordinary, surviving since the Dark World's creation. There are rumors that it's connected to thousands of other worlds. Nobody had been able to clear the tower's trials yet, but as players grow stronger, the various powers will be able to activate a portion of it, if not all. If that happens, the various powers will reach the main continent, even without the teleportation gate. Only, they will have to do so by passing through another otherworld. Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow, who stood behind Shurfeng, frowned at the news. If what the female Dark Knight said was true, wouldn't that mean the effort they had put into capturing the teleportation gate would go to waste? The Ancient God's Tower. Shurfeng had some recollection of this name. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The Ancient God's Tower was connected to thousands of other worlds. It was also one of the reasons that the Dark World was considered a special otherworld in God's domain. However, since no power had taken control of the Dark World's teleportation gate in his past, none of the Dark World's powers had bothered to challenge the tower's trials. Activating the Ancient God's Tower was insanely difficult, after all. Of course, while current players had no hope of fully activating the Ancient God's Tower, activating some of it should be possible. That's right. The Dark World's various powers have already turned their focus to the Ancient God's Tower, and Demon's Heart has quite a bit of resources and information relating to it. I'm afraid it won't be long before the various powers band together to challenge the tower, Blue Rainbow said, nodding. 1 darkness crystal per person was no trivial cost. No one would pay such a high fee unless necessary. What if I can help you secure the Ancient God's Tower within a short time? Shurfeng asked. Chapter 2575, Crazy Choice, You'll help us secure the Ancient God's Tower? Shurfeng's question stunned Blue Rainbow and Elder Gold. As long as you secure the Ancient God's Tower before anyone else, you'll have full control of the tower's teleportation array for a certain time, correct? Shurfeng said. The Ancient God's Tower had a total of 7 floors, and each housed several teleportation arrays to different otherworlds. Some were even connected to resource-rich secret lands. The first player to conquer any of the floor's trials would become the floor's first floor master. Once a month, players could contest for the title. If Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society could conquer the Ancient God's Tower's first floor, they would have full control of that floor for the next month, and no one could leave the Dark World through the teleportation arrays during that time. Guild Leader Black Flame, you might not be aware, but the Ancient God's Tower isn't like the Dark World's teleportation gate. Aside from the intense suppression non-dark players like yourself face in the Dark World, players are prohibited from using tools within the tower. NPCs cannot enter the tower, either. Players will have to rely on their own strength and skills to clear the trials, Elder Gold said. He didn't doubt Zero Wing's strength, but the Ancient God's Tower was in the Dark World, where non-dark players wouldn't be able to exhibit their full strength. Including the ban on tools and NPCs, Zero Wing wouldn't accomplish anything in the tower. If it were so easy, Demon's Heart wouldn't have bothered to gather the Dark World's various powers in an attempt to conquer the tower and would have sought the help of the main continent's superpowers instead. The various superpowers certainly had the strength to trample the Dark World's various powers, normally. That's right. Not only do the Ancient Gods Tower's trials have a strict time limit, but we'll also need a minimum of 200 Tier 3 experts to clear them. Without enough players, we won't be able to handle the hordes of monsters within, not to mention capture the tower's cities. While our guilds can barely gather 200 Tier 3 experts, the first floor's trial is just as difficult as a level 100, super large-scale team dungeon. Our experts simply don't meet the weapon, equipment, skill, and spell requirements, Blue Rainbow insisted, nodding. Their two guilds had considered raiding the Ancient Gods Tower, but the feat was too difficult. No individual power in the Dark World could even clear the first floor's trial. Unfortunately, Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society no longer had the option of allying with other powers. After the Dark World's invading army had been defeated, Demon's Heart had exposed their guild's alliance with Zero Wing, instantly isolating them from the rest of the Dark World. As a result, both guilds were forced into deepening their relationship with Zero Wing. If they didn't, their guilds would be doomed once Demon's Heart and the Dark World's other powers conquered the Ancient Gods Tower's first floor. Relax. That won't be a problem, Shifeng said, chuckling. However, I have an extra condition if we succeed. Shifeng knew far more about the Ancient Gods Tower than any player in God's domain, and as such, he knew that the two guilds had no chance of success, even if they worked together. That was only true for the current Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society, however. Are you really that confident in our success, Guild Leader Black Flame? Blue Rainbow asked. She knew that Zero Wing had extraordinary Tier 3 experts, but the suppression regular players faced in the Dark World was nothing to ignore. Even ordinary Domain Realm experts would, at best, exhibit Void Realm combat standards. This was why the main continent's various superpowers had allied with the Dark World's powers, rather than invade the Otherworld. While I can't guarantee our success, I'm 70% to 80% confident, Shifeng replied. 80%? Elder Gold stuttered, his eyes going wide. If Shifeng hadn't personally captured the Dark World's teleportation gate, he would have assumed the swordsman was an escaped lunatic from a mental asylum. Even without the Dark World suppression, the various superpowers wouldn't be guaranteed to conquer the Ancient Gods Tower's first floor. Even with its heaven-defying foundations, Zero Wing should, at best, have a 40% success rate. 70 or 80% was practically ensured victory. May I know of your conditions, Guild Leader Black Flame? Blue Rainbow asked after calming down. Although she didn't know whether or not Shifeng was telling the truth, Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society would only benefit if his plan succeeded. They had no reason to refuse. It's quite simple. I want 80% of the Ancient Gods Tower's profits. I also want the authority to manage your guild's main force members. In addition, my command will take precedence over your guild leaders during times of impending danger, Shifeng said after giving the matter some thought. This, Elder Gold could not help but hesitate. If Zero Wing helped them gain control over the Ancient Gods Tower, their guilds wouldn't mind splitting the profits. They could even accept only 20%, but giving up control of their main force members was absurd. Rest assured, I won't interfere with your main force's daily activities. They just need to follow orders when I need them, Shifeng said. Of course, you can return and take the time to consider my proposal. I don't need an answer right away. We have no need to consider the offer, Guild Leader Black Flame, Dark Rhapsody agrees. In return, Zero Wing must allow our members to travel through the teleportation gate freely. Of course, Dark Rhapsody will do its best to assist in establishing the candlelight trading firm in the Dark World, Blue Rainbow abruptly interjected. Rainbow, are you insane? You're talking about the management rights for your guild's main force. Elder Gold asked as he stared at the female Dark Knight in shock. Agreeing to this condition was on par with handing Shifeng control of a fraction of Dark Rhapsody's backbone. Claiming that Shifeng would act as a partial guild leader was no exaggeration. I'm still sane. My guild leader impressed upon me the importance of cooperating with Zero Wing. Moreover, I don't think that guild leader Black Flame actually fancies our two guilds' main forces, Blue Rainbow informed Elder Gold via whisper. Realization immediately dawned on the older man. Zero Wing no longer lacked manpower. With every moment, a ton of experts applied to join the guild, and Zero Wing now controlled the Dark World's teleportation gate. Until someone activated the ancient god's tower, Zero Wing had a firm grasp on the Dark World's lifeline. In truth, even Shifeng was a little surprised. He hadn't expected Blue Rainbow to agree so decisively. Any other large guild's upper echelon would have likely turned and left in a huff. Deal. Deity Society will agree to your conditions, as well, Guild Leader Black Flame. However, Deity Society wants the same conditions as Dark Rhapsody in return, Elder Gold said, sighing. Now that the Dark World's various powers recognized their guilds as Zero Wing's allies, they had no choice but to stick by Zero Wing until the very end. Moreover, an alliance with this guild would ensure that both Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society could develop far faster than their dark counterparts. That won't be a problem. Once we sign the contract, your guild's members may use the teleportation gate to their heart's content, Shifeng agreed, nodding. What do we do once the contract has been signed? Elder Gold asked. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Demon's Heart was already in a rush to find allies to conquer the ancient god's tower. Once its team had enough Tier 3 experts, it would challenge the tower's trials. Hence, Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society were running out of time. Simple. Send your main force members to Stone Forest City immediately. Zero Wing will take responsibility for their growth, Shifeng said, chuckling. Everything in God's domain boiled down to players' strength, including raiding team dungeons and the ancient god's tower. As long as he could help the two guilds' main force members grow strong enough, raiding the tower wouldn't be an issue. Their growth? Shifeng's demand stunned Blue Rainbow. She had never thought he'd choose such an option. Where are we going? To the level 120 secret land, Poison City. Shifeng declared. Chapter 2576, Secret Land Exploration. When Shifeng stated his intentions to travel to a level 120 secret land, both Blue Rainbow and Elder Gold were speechless. The various superpowers hadn't even entered level 110,100 man team dungeons once. In fact, barely any players had reached level 110 yet. While secret lands weren't dungeons, they were even more dangerous. Even the safest secret land could rival super large-scale, hard-mode team dungeons of the same level. Not even superpowers would dare suggest exploring a level 120 secret land. Yet, Shifeng spoke of doing so as casually as if he were visiting the local market. For a moment, Blue Rainbow and Elder Gold doubted that they played the same game Shifeng did. What? Is there a problem? Shifeng curiously asked when he saw the two representatives' dazed expressions. And no, it's nothing. Only, Guild Leader Black Flame, we're talking about a level 120 secret land. I'm afraid that with our current levels and equipment, Elder Gold said worriedly. Entering a level 120 secret land wouldn't be a problem, even a level 1 player could do it. The problem was whether or not they could leave the secret land alive. Unlike dungeons, secret lands' difficulty and number of monsters weren't fixed, but randomized. If one were lucky, a 100-man team would be enough to survive. If not, they might need a team of 1,000 players, or even 5,000, to make it out. This was why raiding secret lands proved much harder than raiding a team dungeon of the same level. Normally, guilds would mobilize a large fraction of their members to raid a secret land, but after level 100, only Tier 3 experts had any chance of surviving. Tier 2 experts would only hold them back. In other words, guilds couldn't use all of their available manpower to raid level 100+ secret lands, they'd have to rely on a small number of Tier 3 experts. This was precisely why the various major powers and superpowers hadn't bothered to raid level 100+ secret lands, even after crossing the level 100 threshold. Relax. As long as everyone follows my orders, we shouldn't have any major problems, Shifeng said. Chukdo during his previous life, Poison City had been famous for how incredibly dangerous it was. Even when the various superpowers had dispatched a team of several thousand Tier 3 experts, they had failed to complete the raid. The various superpowers had only conquered the secret land after their experts had reached Tier 4. However, Shifeng had no intention of capturing Poison City. He only wanted the fragment of Solomon's sword that hid within. Moreover, he now had the fragmented legendary ranked Abyssal Blade and Ring of Gospel. The ring would be particularly helpful on this endeavor. Once he had become an intermediate master magician, he found he could amplify the Ring of Gospel's effects until it was even effective against Tier 4 monsters, which drastically increased his chances of obtaining the sword fragment. Now, he only lacked numbers. Generally, one would need at least 1,000 Tier 3 experts to raid level 100 plus secret lands, but even with the Hell Legion's 300 Tier 3 experts, he only had around 500 under his command. It was too risky to take such a small team into the secret land. However, if he included Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society's 200 plus Tier 3 experts, he'd have a much higher chance of securing Solomon's sword's fragment. Something still felt off to Blue Rainbow and Elder Gold, but since they had already signed a contract with Shifeng, they couldn't go back on their word for no good reason. The two representatives then contacted their guilds, secretly gathering their Tier 3 experts. Meanwhile, Shifeng gathered Zero Wings experts and the Hell Legion. In the Dark World, news of the alliance between Zero Wing, Dark Rhapsody, and Deity Society spread quickly. A commotion rose all across the Otherworld, and when the Dark World's many independent players learned that the two Dark Guilds members could use the teleportation gate for free, many of them began to apply. Elder Heart, World Domination followed Demon's Heart's instructions to spearhead the attack against Zero Wing, and yet, the guild's reputation is in tatters, and it has become the Dark World's shame. To make matters worse, Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society have become incredibly popular after allying with Zero Wing. If you still can't offer anything substantial, we'll have to consider doing the same, Dawn Dominance coldly informed Furious Heart, who sat across from him in the reception room. Please, rest assured, Guild Leader Dawn. We are responsible for inviting world domination into this situation, and we won't let your guild suffer for it. Don't you want to take revenge against Zero Wing, Guild Leader Dawn? Furious Heart asked. Not only does Zero Wing possess the popular Stone Forest City, but it has also taken control of the Dark World's teleportation gate. It stands in the limelight on the eastern continent, but the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. Many superpowers currently find Zero Wing's popularity to be irksome. I want something practical, not empty promises. Dawn Dominance growled, rolling his eyes. He understood Furious Heart's logic, but the problem was that no one could do anything to Zero Wing right now. However, the problem was that nobody was capable of doing anything against Zero Wing right now. We have quietly received funding from quite a few superpowers. We've also secured a loan of weapons and equipment. If World Domination is willing to join our alliance, we'll lend you 50 sets of level 105 fine gold equipment and 10 sets of dark gold equipment for 10 days without cost, Furious Heart calmly stated, smiling. How about it? Even ordinary superpowers have a hard time acquiring such equipment, but World Domination can borrow it by joining our alliance. With these sets, your guild can raid level 100 team dungeons, obtaining even more top-tier weapons and equipment. In addition, once we've captured the Ancient God's Tower, World Domination will receive 5% of the tower's shares. It's a much better offer than what Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society accepted from Zero Wing, don't you think? 50 sets of level 105 fine gold equipment and 10 sets of level 105 dark gold equipment. The terms of Furious Heart's deal astonished Dawn Dominance. You can get your hands on so much top-tier equipment. Although he knew that the outcome of the war had enraged Demon's Heart and the outside world's superpowers, he had never dreamed they would go to such lengths to deal with Zero Wing. With that much top-tier equipment, he could arm an incredibly powerful 100-man team. Even raiding level 100, super large-scale team dungeons and level 110 mythic field bosses would be possible, not to mention level 100,000 100-man team dungeons. What had their goal been in heading to Cold Spring Forest? To obtain better weapons and equipment, as well as rapidly rising through the levels. If they had enough top-tier weapons and equipment, would leveling and securing more still be a problem? Don't concern yourself with that, Guild Leader Dawn. Just sign the contract, and we'll hand the equipment over immediately, Furious Heart urged, chuckling. Deal. I'll agree to your offer. Dawn Dominance declared. Very well. I'll contact my Vice Guild leader immediately. You'll have the weapons and equipment promised within half a day, Furious Heart said, not surprised in the least by Dawn Dominance's reaction. Only a fool would refuse such an offer. After signing the contract, Furious Heart left World Domination's residence and returned to Demon City. Is everything settled? Flaming Light raised his head and asked as Furious Heart entered his office. It's done. The Dark World's various powers have agreed to join our alliance. We can raid the Ancient God's Tower at any time, Furious Heart reported. Good. Flaming Light nodded, satisfied. Smiling, he continued, Zero Wing must assume I'm helpless now that it controls the Dark World's teleportation gate. Unfortunately, Zero Wing is unaware that its actions have only earned more loathing and anger. Zero Wing had no background, yet it sat on a mountain of wealth and resources. One could even say that it had monopolized all of the Dark World's resources. Naturally, the various superpowers wouldn't let the guild get away with it. Hence, without lifting a finger, plenty of superpowers and corporations had approached him, declaring their intentions to supply all sorts of resources in exchange for dragging Zero Wing down from its pedestal. As long as Demon's Heart secured the Ancient God's Tower, it would usher in dark times for Zero Wing. If Zero Wing had obediently accepted defeat, it would have only lost Cold Spring Forest, but now, it would lose everything. The guild's night division was limited to Cold Spring Forest, after all. Elsewhere, Shifeng had reached Poison City alongside Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society's main force members. The moment the Dark players set foot in the secret land, they shuddered. Black fog covered the land, and they felt as if they were walking on clouds as they stepped into it. They also felt suddenly cold and hungry, and their 5 senses and reaction speeds had weakened. Here, they wouldn't be able to exhibit half of their usual combat power. However, the dark fog wasn't the worst part. They were far more afraid of the level 115+ monsters that roamed the forest outside of Poison City. Even the weakest monster here was a High Lord, and many were Great Lord and Grand Lord ranked wandering souls. These monsters had once been members of the army that guarded Poison City before the black fog had devoured them. The closer they got to these monsters, the more the corrosive energy in the area affected them. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Sure enough, there are a lot of monsters here. Shifeng was similarly astonished when he saw the wandering souls nearby. Not only did the secret land house far more monsters than during his previous life, but the death energy that enveloped the area was also denser. Of course, that wasn't enough to deter him from exploring the secret land, and he turned to Cola and the others. Start luring monsters, but not too many at once. 500 or 600 will be enough. Shifeng's command rendered Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society's members speechless. They were sure they'd be annihilated if they took on 100 monsters at a time, let alone 500. The death energy in this map was simply too powerful, and all of these monsters were level 115 or higher. Trying to fight 500 or 600 simultaneously was suicide. Okay. However, Cola, Fire Dance, and the others remained unfazed. They immediately dashed into the forest on their own and began to attract the wandering souls aggro. Chapter 2577, Difference of Level 120, Frightening Wealth. As Cola, Fire Dance, and the others darted through the silent forest, they caused a commotion. Small groups of wandering souls flew toward the offending players, quickly surrounding them. These monsters were so fast that ordinary experts wouldn't have a chance to escape. However, the encirclement was practically non-existent to Cola and Zero Wing's other MTs. Like unstoppable tanks, they charged through the monsters, shoving aside any that stood in their path with their shields. None of the wandering souls could stop their advance. Meanwhile, Fire Dance and the other more agile players maneuvered their way around the wandering souls, letting none lay a hand on them. The death energy the wandering souls exuded had no effect on Cola, Fire Dance, or their companions. It almost seemed like some kind of invisible barrier protected them from the death energy's corrosion. In no time at all, Cola and the others had pulled around 600 monsters toward the rest of the team. Wandering Soul, Undead, High Lord, Level 115 HP 45, 000/45, 000/000, Elite Wandering Soul, Undead, Great Lord, Level 116 HP 120, 000/120, 000/000, Crazed Soul, Undead, Grand Lord, Level 116 HP 400, 000/400, 000/000, facing the 400+ Wandering Souls, 100+ Elite Wandering Souls, and 6 Crazed Souls. Everyone on the team couldn't help but shudder. Unlike ordinary monsters, these Wandering Souls had once been Poison City's warriors. Even in death, they retained the skills they had used in life. When several hundred Wandering Souls gathered, they actually formed a battle array, and although it wasn't very strong, it significantly boosted the monsters' movement speed and reaction speed. A faint layer of mana had also appeared around the monsters, strengthening their defense and the power of their skills and spells. However, the team was even more surprised to find that these Wandering Souls didn't employ simple pack tactics like ordinary monsters. Rather, they moved in proper formation. The Wandering Souls with shields and melee weapons moved to the front of the group, while those with bows and staves stood in the back. The small force gradually and orderly advanced. So, this is a level 120 secret land? Blue Rainbow was shocked as she watched the monsters march like a uniform army. Although she had known that level 100+ secret lands were extraordinary, she couldn't help her surprise as she experienced it for herself. These monsters were already a major challenge since their basic attributes were higher than players of the same tier and level. They also had far more HP and defense. Now that they could fight with as much organization as NPCs, their combat power would drastically increase. If their team hadn't had the numerical advantage, they wouldn't have stood a chance. Even Hell Rush frowned at the incoming force. Normally, the Hell Legion's experts wouldn't have any problems fighting these monsters one-on-one. Not even the Grand Lord-ranked Crazed Souls would be too much for the Hell Legion to overcome, but now, these monsters had their own battle array. Not only did this battle array boost the Wandering Souls' physical performance, but it also drastically reduced the number of weak points they had. Including the monster's level advantage, even the Hell Legion was in for a tough battle without the help of weapons and equipment with the Ignore levels attribute. Only Shifeng seemed unaffected by Poison City's formidable monsters. This was the true combat power of God's Domain's monsters. All monsters before level 115 were merely obstacles to help players get used to the game. Once players neared the level 120 threshold, however, God's Domain no longer catered to its players. Instead, players had to adapt to God's Domain. Monsters would begin to behave like living beings, with their own characteristics. If players couldn't take advantage of these characteristics, even experts of the same tier would fall in a one-on-one fight. This was why level 120 secret lands and team dungeons were true treasure troves for tier 3 players, containing all sorts of ancient inheritances, skill, and spell books. As the Undead Legion approached, Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society's players mentally prepared themselves for a hard fight. Meanwhile, Shifeng retrieved the Ring of Gospel and spent 5,000 magic crystals to activate Miniature World. The Phantom World descended, and the Undead Legion's basic attributes fell rapidly. Their reaction speed and physique also plummeted. The Dark players on the team were stupefied. They had experienced the Ring of Gospel's power before, but they were still as shocked as they had been the first time. A moment ago, their senses had warned them that these undead were powerful opponents, but now, the monsters seemed relatively easy to defeat. They couldn't help but feel grateful that Shifeng stood on their side, not against them. Alright, attack. Let's end this battle quickly. Shifeng commanded when he realized most of his team was still dazed. The Ring of Gospel was indeed an amazing tool, but it was incredibly costly. Just maintaining Miniature World for 10 minutes cost 5,000 magic crystals. Shifeng's command shook everyone from their stupor, and they began to activate skills and spells against the incoming legion. Now that they had the advantage in basic attributes, the quickest and simplest way to victory was to face these wandering souls head-on. Boom! 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 When the first volley of Tier 3 skills and spells landed, the ground and nearby forest shook violently. The bombardment even transformed the terrain around them. After 10 minutes, over 80% of the undead legion had fallen, and the few survivors only had scant amounts of HP remaining. Even without miniature world suppression, the team could rely on their overwhelming numerical advantage to eliminate the remaining monsters. During the fight, everyone on the team was able to experience what it felt like to face a true monster the main god system had designed. The main god system hadn't restrained the wandering souls in the slightest, and they had incredible control of the death energy wafting off them. If players did not learn how to manipulate their own mana to defend themselves, the death energy would quickly corrode and influence their bodies. Normally, this learning process would be incredibly dangerous. If players failed to defend themselves, the corrosion would temporarily paralyze them. An instant death wouldn't be surprising in that case. Fortunately, the team had more than just an overwhelming numerical advantage. The monsters before them were at death's door, and as a result, their combat power had dropped slightly. Hence, they posed far less of a threat. Every player on the team was a Tier 3 expert, with far greater talent and combat standards than ordinary players. Although they had only experienced such combat for a short time, they had all gained a newfound understanding of mana control and their mana bodies. However, the team was far more surprised to see how much EXP they earned from the slain wandering souls. The monsters granted such abundant EXP that even Blue Rainbow and Elder Gold were shocked. Every member of the team saw a significant rise in their experience bars after just defeating around 600 wandering souls. Some players even rose from level 107 to 108. Their leveling speed here was at least 10 times faster than in the outside world. Moreover, the monsters had dropped a bunch of loot. Items were scattered across the entire battlefield. These monsters' drop rate was more than double that of monsters in the outside world, particularly when it came to weapons and equipment. Even the weakest piece of equipment was level 115 Mysterious Iron rank, and 6 pieces of level 115 Secret Silver equipment had dropped. For a while, the Dark players had bloodshot eyes. Read latest chapters at World. EU to them, level 115 Mysterious Iron equipment might be subpar, but level 115 Secret Silver equipment was incredibly precious. So long as they equipped level reduction gemstones, they could arm themselves with level 115 Secret Silver equipment after reaching level 110. Naturally, level 115 Secret Silver equipment was slightly better than level 110 Fine Gold equipment. Due to equipment's low drop rate, the various powers were going mad in their search for level 105 Fine Gold equipment. They could only dream of level 110 Fine Gold items. Now, after fighting for less than 15 minutes, their team had obtained 6 pieces of level 115 Secret Silver equipment. If they grinded here for a full day, their harvest would be astronomical. While Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society's members envied Zero Wing over so much loot, Fire Dance, who was responsible for collecting the items, excitedly ran up to Shifeng. Guild Leader, it dropped. Chapter 2578, Frightening Zero Wing. As Fire Dance approached with a tattered, old tome, Shifeng's eyes widened in surprise. What? It dropped, just like that. The monsters wandering around Poison City had a chance of dropping 2 support items when killed, and both were worth thousands of gold. However, no one would willingly part with either support item, even when offered a level 100 plus epic item. One of the 2 items was an ancient potion, while the other was a mana battle array. The ancient potion in question could accelerate the process of unlocking players' mana bodies, while permanently improving their mana control. With this potion, even ordinary Tier 3 players could unlock their mana body's full potential within 2 months. On the other hand, the mana battle array was even more astounding. Normally, battle arrays had to be engraved into players' equipment, meaning that once players replaced their battle array equipment, they'd lose the battle array. However, players could directly learn the mana battle array found in Poison City. Hence, they wouldn't have to worry about losing the array when they switched to new equipment. Players could use it forever. The mana battle array required a minimum of 12 players to activate. Once active, not only would it increase the mana density around players, but players' basic attributes would rise, as well. Most importantly, the battle array would form a layer of mana armor around players, increasing their magic resistance and resistance to foreign energies' corrosion. The tome in Fire Dance's hand was none other than the mana battle array. It was no wonder she was so ecstatic. As the mana battle array was akin to a skill, it could be used where tools were prohibited, such as many of God's domain's level 100+ maps and team dungeons. In these locations, the mana battle array was practically invaluable. In the past, the various powers would spend more than 2 weeks grinding near Poison City without obtaining a single mana battle array, and yet, one had just dropped from a single wave of wandering souls. The current drop rate was astounding. When Hell Rush and the others saw the mana battle array's information, they couldn't help but feel a little jealous. With a complete set, one could increase a team's overall strength to a whole new level. The mana battle array would be especially helpful when teams explored certain maps or dungeons and didn't meet the equipment requirements. That tome was even more valuable than level 115 top-tier weapons and equipment. Now that they knew the Wandering Souls could drop something as awesome as the mana battle array, Zero Wings members were overcome with fighting spirit. Cola and the others immediately split away from the main team to lure more Wandering Souls. Moreover, they now knew that the team could easily handle 600 Wandering Souls with the Ring of Gospel's assistance, and so they decided to gather even more monsters to maximize the ring's effects. After a short moment, Cola and his comrades ran toward the team with nearly 800 Wandering Souls trailing behind them. Seeing this, the team's members sharpened their focus and prepared for battle. Over the next 3 days, the team restlessly grinded on the Wandering Souls roaming the forest around Poison City. After 3 days, every member of the team had gained 5 levels. Fire Dance, Cola, and the other Zero Wing members had reached level 114, while Feng had reached level 115. Meanwhile, Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society's members had reached level 112 and 113. Their levels would even shock the various superpowers. The Dark players on the team wished they could stay in Poison City forever. Leveling 5 times in 3 days was unheard of, especially at their levels. Normally, they'd be lucky to level up once every 5 days. No one would believe them if they told them. Meanwhile, Blue Rainbow and Elder Gold finally understood why Feng was so confident about helping them conquer the Ancient God's Tower. This leveling speed was simply maddening. Furthermore, fighting these monsters had helped them rapidly improve their combat standards. What Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society's members didn't know was that Feng had spent an astronomical number of magic crystals to make this 3-day grind possible. He had arrived with 600,000 magic crystals in his bag, but now, he had less than 50,000 remaining. Moreover, he had used Miniature World sparingly. Otherwise, he would have blown through all 600,000 crystals by now. Of course, the bounty he received in return was amazing. During the past 3 days, he had obtained over 700 pieces of level 115 secret silver equipment and over 5,000 pieces of level 115 mysterious iron equipment. He could easily earn back the cost of this grind by selling the mysterious iron equipment. He had also acquired a total of 87 level 115 fine gold weapons and equipment. Of course, Feng had no intention of selling any of the weapons or equipment that had dropped. Rather, he'd make them available to his guildmates. After embedding a level reduction gemstone into every weapon and equipment piece, he distributed them among Blue Frost and Zero Wing's other members from Shelter 1, providing a massive boost to their basic attributes. Now, their attributes were even higher than the Hell Legion's experts. Even in Netherworld Empire, the Hell Legion's members were experts among experts. Every one of them wore level 105 fine gold equipment, with some wearing dark gold ranked items. Their equipment standards even ranked at the top compared to the various superpowers experts, yet it was 2 whole ranks weaker than the items Blue Frost and his team wore. Of course, Feng did not mistreat the Hell Legion, granting the Legion members a portion of the level 115 secret, silver equipment. After all, he had a contract with Netherworld Empire, which required him to keep the Hell Legion's equipment up to date. Furthermore, the Hell Legion's members had incredible combat standards. Better equipment would only help them exhibit even more combat power. Aside from weapons and equipment, Feng had obtained plenty of valuable items. He now had a total of 46 mana battle arrays and over 80 bottles of the ancient potion. He had also secured over 100 tier 3 skill and spell books. Combined, all of these items were even more valuable than the weapons and equipment that had dropped near Poison City. Rather than letting these precious items collect dust in his bag, he distributed them among the team as he had with the weapons and equipment. However, he had chosen 46 Zero-Wing members to learn the mana battle arrays. He also decided to give the 50+ Zero-Wing members who had entered the Truth Realm one ancient potion each. He passed the majority of the remaining 20+ bottles to the Hell Legion, Dark Rhapsody's Blue Rainbow, and Deity Society's Elder Gold. "We get a share, too?" Blue Rainbow asked as Feng handed her the potion. The ancient potion permanently improved players' mana control and helped them unlock their mana bodies. Unless one were a fool, they'd recognize how valuable the ancient potion was. Its drop rate was only so high now because they were pioneering Poison City. The drop rate would certainly drop to abysmal lows once this period was over. If it were up to her, she wouldn't share any of the potions with outsiders. "Of course. I already told you that I'm going to help you grow stronger," Feng said, nodding. If these were members of other guilds, he wouldn't even give them the ancient potion's remnants. However, the Hell Legion, Dark Rhapsody, and Deity Society were different. They were Zero-Wing's allies. It was a pity that the ancient potion's drop rate was so low, and he couldn't afford to give away too many. Otherwise, he would have given Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society more of Zero-Wing's share. The monsters they were currently fighting were the weakest in the Poison City's outer reaches. He would have to travel deeper into the secret land if he wanted to obtain the fragment of Solomon's sword. Hence, he decided to help those with high combat standards first. Both Blue Rainbow and Elder Gold were on the cusp of reaching the Domain Realm. If they grew stronger, they could provide a huge boost to the team's overall combat power. The team's dark players grew excited when they heard Feng's reply. They hadn't expected to receive any of the ancient potions, but knowing they could earn a small slice of the pie was definitely worth celebrating. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, Guild Leader, I found the sealed sword you mentioned inside the city, Fire Dance suddenly reported in the team chat while everyone rested. But what? Feng prodded. The fragment of Solomon's sword was inside Poison City. To be precise, it was sealed within the city. If players wanted to claim it, they wouldn't have to go as far as conquering Poison City. They merely need to undo the seal on the sword fragment. Of the fragments Feng had yet to obtain, this was the easiest to acquire. After all, this so-called fragment was only a level 100 epic weapon. Solomon's sword was very powerful, but to reach that power, one would have to reproduce it with all 5 of its fragments. This was why the weapon was so hard to reproduce. Even after obtaining 4 fragments, all players would have was 4 epic weapons. Some might not even realize that their epic weapon was, in fact, a fragment of Solomon's sword. But there's a tier 5 sword saint and 2 tier 4 NPCs guarding the sword. Chapter 2579, Crimson-Eyed Sword Saint. Upon hearing Fire Dance's report, Feng fell silent for a very long time. What was going on? NPCs? 1 tier 5 NPC and 2 tier 4 NPCs at that. According to his information, Poison City had no such NPCs. It was a city of the dead. No living creatures could survive in this secret land. Should we retreat, guild leader? Fire Dance asked. They might not have a problem with tier 4 NPCs. With their numerical advantage and the Ring of Gospel's effects, they might stand a chance against 2 tier 4 NPCs, but trying to take on a tier 5 sword saint was a joke. A Tier 5 Sword Saint was an apex being in the current god's domain. Not even kingdoms would dare to offend such an individual. And a Tier 5 Sword Saint could slay Tier 3 players as easily as chopping vegetables. A Tier 5 NPC's combat standards were no trivial matter. They could even contend with Void Realm experts. To deal with a Tier 5 NPC, they'd need several dozen fully armed Tier 4 experts to stand a chance. No, wait there for now. We'll come find you, Shifeng said, shaking his head. He was most confident of obtaining the fragment of Solomon's sword within Poison City. He had almost no information on the rest. Thus, there was no way he'd leave without getting a good look at this fragment. At this stage of the game, only he had a Solomon's sword fragment. If he didn't take advantage of his chance to claim the rest before others, obtaining the fragments would be as challenging as finding a needle in a haystack. These fragments didn't have a mechanism to detect other fragments. Unless the players that obtained a fragment advertised the weapon, he wouldn't know where to find them. This was why he was in such a hurry. Getting his hands on the sword fragments was relatively easy right now, but as players reached higher levels, doing so would become increasingly difficult. This was why legendary items had been so extraordinarily rare in his past, particularly legendary weapons. Collecting the necessary fragments to reproduce the true item was too much of a challenge. A lot of manpower wasn't enough. One would have to be particularly lucky. Of course, there was an exception to this rule: players could rely on ancient tomes. With these tomes in hand, players could search through God's Domain's database for any information they desired. However, ancient tomes were almost as rare as legendary weapons, and again, one would have to get lucky to find one. After roughly 2 hours, the team of Dark players, the Hell Legion, and Zero Wings members reached the plaza. Within its center stood a dried fountain. If one examined the fountain closely, they discover a faintly glowing magic array, which suppressed the dull gray longsword half buried in the fountain. Even with the magic array's suppression, the dull sword sapped away any life around it, turning the city into a land of death. It was clear that the sword's influence would be even more astonishing without the magic array to bind it. 3 NPCs stood around the dull gray sword in silence, and at the lead was a one-eyed, red-headed man wearing a snowy white cap. Elvos, Crimson-Eyed Sword Saint, Human, Sword Saint, Level. HP. / Crap. A titled Sword Saint. Shifeng felt lightheaded when he saw the one-eyed man. Tier 5 titled NPCs were like kings among Tier 5 NPCs. They were responsible for miraculous feats in God's domain. In the past, not even a Tier 5 domain realm expert would dare offend a Tier 5 titled NPC. Only Tier 5 heroes could contend with these individuals, but unlike heroes, titled NPCs weren't powerful due to their extraordinary basic attributes, but their superior combat standards and explosive combat power. Because of this, players were more willing to face a Tier 5 hero than a Tier 5 titled NPC. And now, Shifeng stared at such an individual in Poison City, a level 120 secret land. Shifeng's teammates gasped when they noticed Elvos. Even within imperial capitals, they had never seen such an NPC. If they became that man's enemy, their fates would be sealed, and they might even have to delete their accounts, starting all over. As Shifeng hesitated on whether or not he should continue his personal mission for Solomon's sword's fragment, Elvos turned and looked at the wall his team hid behind. "You've been watching for long enough. Show yourselves," Elvos calmly demanded. The moment the Crimson-Eyed Sword Saint spoke, everyone felt an unprecedented pressure bear down on them. Blue Rainbow and Elder Gold struggled against their instincts, which screamed at them to flee. They could feel just how powerful this NPC was. If they made him unhappy, Elvos could render all of the progress they've made in God's domain useless. Such incidents had happened more than once in the Dark World before, and that was precisely why the other world's Dark players didn't dare to offend or casually approach Tier 5 NPCs. In fact, most players actively avoided Tier 4 NPCs. "Don't move," Shifeng suddenly shouted in the team chat. "But, Guild Leader Black Flame, that's a Tier 5 NPC," Elder Gold said. They weren't in an NPC city, and NPCs in the fields were especially unpredictable. The slightest mistake could lead to an unspeakable disaster. I know, but he's already discovered us. He won't let us get away if we try to run, Feng said, offering Elder Gold a bitter smile. Our best option is to do as he says. Never try to provoke a Tier 5 titled NPC. Not a single player in God's domain had a better idea of the power a Tier 5 titled NPC wielded. Once such an NPC discovered them, there was no chance for escape. Not even Tier 5 domain realm experts were guaranteed to outrun a Tier 5 titled NPC. Moreover, Elvo's movement wasn't restricted as the demon god's phantom had been. If this man willed it, Feng would die before he could even activate space movement or spatial gate. I understand. With the warning ringing in his ears, Elder Gold abandoned any thought of fleeing. As Feng had said, a Tier 5 NPC's movement speed wasn't to be underestimated. Moreover, NPCs gained the ability to fly after reaching Tier 4. How could Tier 3 players like themselves possibly hope to outrun such a being? Moreover, the Tier 5 Sword Saint would view any attempt to flee as a challenge to his authority. The outcome of committing such an offense would be far graver than approaching the NPC directly. Under Feng's lead, the team emerged from the small alley that had provided cover and approached the crimson-eyed Sword Saint. Greetings, esteemed Sword Saint. We are here to explore this secret land and accidentally discovered this place. Please forgive us for our trespass, Feng respectfully apologized to Elvos, who currently sat before the fountain. Exploring this secret land? Elvos smiled. The NPC's tone then turned chilly as he continued, You've come for this sword, right? Well? Who commands your force? Killing intent. This was the killing intent of a bona fide Tier 5 titled NPC. Read latest chapters at World. EU. When Elvo's tone had chilled, Feng and all of his team felt the pressure on them increase. They all felt as if lead weights had been tied to their limbs, and everyone struggled to breathe. It felt as if they had plunged into an icy hell. At the same time, they heard a series of system notifications. System, warning. Warning. System, you have triggered the epic event, Crimson Wrath. System, you have 30 seconds to make a decision, kill Elvos, the crimson-eyed Sword Saint, or accept the punishment of death. Chapter 2580, Blade Unsealed, Disaster descends. Everyone on the team, including Feng, wore grim expressions when they saw the system notification. How did things turn out like this? This NPC is a lunatic. Magic Flash immediately began to despair. Whenever players triggered an event in God's domain, including epic events, the system didn't send them a warning beforehand. If even the system was warning them, that could only mean one thing. Certain death. Moreover, they weren't at risk of suffering an ordinary death. Rather, their souls would be extinguished, thoroughly removed from God's domain. They'd have to restart from the very beginning. Even Hell Rush felt doomed, not to mention Magic Flash and the others from Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society. Ordinary deaths were already trouble for the Hell Legion's members. If they all had to start new accounts, their careers in God's domain were as good as over. His superiors might even kill him for this. Guild leader, let's split up and run. There is only one Tier 5 NPC. He can't catch all of us. The lucky ones might be able to get away safely, Blue Frost suggested. They had only one option left, escape. Whether they chose to fight the crimson-eyed Sword Saint or accept their death sentence, they'd meet the same end. They had to go for a third option. Overhearing Blue Frost, the rest of the team nodded in agreement. Sacrifices were inevitable, but that was still better than utter annihilation. They wouldn't have anyone but themselves to blame if they died. Do we really only have one option? As Feng sensed Elvo's killing intent growing stronger, he was flabbergasted. They had only come to a level 120 secret land, yet the main god system had set such an absurd trap. Human NPCs were different from demon gods. They wouldn't set a death trap for players for no good reason. Even if they did, they usually gave players a chance to survive. Did I miss some clue? The seconds flew by as Shifeng fell deep into thought. Guild leader Black Flame, what is the plan? We only have 10 seconds left to decide. With only 10 seconds on the system clock, Elder Gold and Blue Rainbow urged Shifeng, anxious. Acting rashly would only lead to a terrible outcome. The team's best chance was to move simultaneously, but even after more than 20 seconds, Shifeng had remained motionless. It was driving them crazy. When only 5 seconds remained, Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society's members grew restless. Just before they split up and ran, however, Shifeng moved. To everyone's surprise and confusion, he took the initiative to approach Elvos. Esteemed Sword Saint, we had no intention of offending you, and we did not come here under anyone's command. This is but a coincidence. If you refuse to believe me, I will challenge you in the name of the Sky Goddess. Shifeng declared as he walked up to the crimson-eyed Sword Saint. After his declaration, silence fell over the entire plaza. Guild leader Black Flame, are you insane? Blue Rainbow stared at Shifeng in astonishment as he issued a challenge. He's a Tier 5 titled Sword Saint. Guild leader. Blue Frost watched Shifeng, as well, utterly baffled. A Tier 5 NPC was no simple opponent. With the gods in seclusion, Tier 5 NPCs stood at the apex of God's domain. As a current Tier 3 player, just escaping a Tier 5 NPC would be miraculous, not to mention challenging one. You wish to challenge me? Elvos laughed. I'm afraid you don't yet qualify for such a fight, young man. Of course, I am quite open-minded. Since you wish to prove that you're not following anyone's command, I'll give you all a chance. Hearing Elvos offer another option, the team members took a deep breath, their eyes glued on Shifeng. This is actually possible. Blue Rainbow muttered, shocked. They had been on the brink of death, yet Shifeng's statement had opened a path for survival. His courage and capabilities were amazing. It is. The system notification was a hint. While defeating a Tier 5 Sword Saint seems impossible at first glance, that word has many meanings. The system never specified that we have to kill him to defeat him, so we don't necessarily need to clash with the NPC to defeat him. Issuing a challenge was the best solution, Elder Gold said, realization dawning as he read the system notifications again. He then returned his gaze to Shifeng and continued, however, Black Flame is incredible. Even in such a tense situation, he found the right solution to this problem. Just how brave is that man? Does he really think he can defeat a Tier 5 Sword Saint? Elvos' killing intent was no laughing matter. Even as a peak expert, Elder Gold felt his mind numb when subjected to the lethal energy. He couldn't get past the desire to flee. Logically, a domain realm expert shouldn't be any more immune to the killing intent than he was. Fear was a basic instinct for all creatures, after all. With only 10 seconds on the system clock, Elder Gold and Blue Rainbow urged Shifeng, anxious. Acting rashly would only lead to a terrible outcome. The team's best chance was to move simultaneously, but even after more than 20 seconds, Shifeng had remained motionless. It was driving them crazy. When only 5 seconds remained, Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society's members grew restless. Just before they split up and ran, however, Shifeng moved. To everyone's surprise and confusion, he took the initiative to approach Elvos. Esteemed Sword Saint, we had no intention of offending you, and we did not come here under anyone's command. This is but a coincidence. If you refuse to believe me, I will challenge you in the name of the Sky Goddess. Shifeng declared as he walked up to the crimson-eyed Sword Saint. After his declaration, silence fell over the entire plaza. Guild leader Black Flame, are you insane? Blue Rainbow stared at Shifeng in astonishment as he issued a challenge. He's a Tier 5 titled Sword Saint. Guild leader. Blue Frost watched Shifeng, as well, utterly baffled. A Tier 5 NPC was no simple opponent. With the gods in seclusion, Tier 5 NPCs stood at the apex of God's domain. As a current Tier 3 player, Just escaping a Tier 5 NPC would be miraculous, not to mention challenging one. You wish to challenge me? Elvos laughed. I'm afraid you don't yet qualify for such a fight, young man. Of course, I am quite open-minded. Since you wish to prove that you're not following anyone's command, I'll give you all a chance. Hearing Elvos offer another option, the team members took a deep breath, their eyes glued on Shurfeng. This is actually possible. Blue Rainbow muttered, shocked. They had been on the brink of death, yet Shurfeng's statement had opened a path for survival. His courage and capabilities were amazing. It is. The system notification was a hint. While defeating a Tier 5 Sword Saint seems impossible at first glance, that word has many meanings. The system never specified that we have to kill him to defeat him, so we don't necessarily need to clash with the NPC to defeat him. Issuing a challenge was the best solution, Elder Gold said, realization dawning as he read the system notifications again. He then returned his gaze to Shurfeng and continued, however, Black Flame is incredible. Even in such a tense situation, he found the right solution to this problem. Just how brave is that man? Does he really think he can defeat a Tier 5 Sword Saint? Elvos' killing intent was no laughing matter. Even as a peak expert, Elder Gold felt his mind numb when subjected to the lethal energy. He couldn't get past the desire to flee. Logically, a domain realm expert shouldn't be any more immune to the killing intent than he was. Fear was a basic instinct for all creatures, after all. However, after everyone breathed a sigh of relief, Elvos continued. A cursed city lord runs Poison City. Since you are here to explore this city, facing him is inevitable. What I want of you is simple. Slay the city lord and free him of his curse. None of you will leave this city before fulfilling this task. If you try, I will personally dice you into mincemeat. System, congratulations. You have accepted the inferior legendary quest, Beginning of the End. Quest content, Slay Poison City's City Lord. If all players within the secret land are slain, all souls will be extinguished. Rewards unknown. Hearing their new task, the team members' gloomy expressions returned. An inferior legendary quest. Moreover, this quest required them to conquer a level 120 secret land. Conquering a level 120 secret land was easier said than done. With their team's current strength, doing so would take around a fortnight. Failure was also likely. A level 120 secret land would be just as hard to raid as a level 120, super, large-scale, hell mode team dungeon. Aside from the high weapon and equipment requirements, players would need sufficient combat standards. To make matters worse, they couldn't leave the secret land until they succeeded. Before they could process this abrupt development, the Crimson-Eyed Sword Saint began to chant an incantation. Pitch black, threefold magic arrays then appeared on the stone ground, releasing dense death energy. Suddenly, a 2-meter-tall man in exquisite armor emerged from the lethal energy cloud. Crodia, Poison City's City Lord, Undead, Superior Mythic, Level 120 HP 3, 700, 000/3, 700, 000/000. Read latest chapters at Wuxia EU, is that the secret land's final boss? Hell Rush's complexion paled when his eyes rested on the City Lord. Even for their team, a level 120 mythic monster would be extremely difficult to defeat. A superior mythic of the same level was no more than a natural disaster. Not even a 3,000-strong army of level 120, Tier 3 experts would be more than a warm-up for such a creature, much less a team of 1,000. Monsters at that rank commanded their own powerful domains. Players of the same level had no chance against them. While the team was shocked over Crodia's statistics, the City Lord approached the dried-up fountain and reached through the barrier. He grasped the dull gray sword's hilt and yanked it out of the stone. As Crodia removed the long sword from its prison, the blade's death energy began to flood into its surroundings. The thick cloud of black fog swept toward the team, and the players backed away. The black fog corroded everything it touched, and even the ground decayed, visibly darkening to a dull gray. You may begin, Elvo's soft voice broke the silence as he gazed over Shifeng and the others. Chapter 2581, Fighting a Superior Mythic. Startled by Elvo's command, everyone fell silent again. How are we supposed to beat that? Kola muttered, watching the dark cloud of death energy envelop Crodia. Crodia's aura had already been strong enough, and with his statistics, their team wasn't even certain they could kill him. After taking hold of the dull grey longsword, however, the City Lord's aura had grown even stronger, and his statistics had undergone a significant transformation. Crodia, Poison City's City Lord, Undead, Superior Mythic, Level 120 HP 5, 400, 000/5, 400, 000/000, just under 5.5 billion HP was simply absurd. He could recover 54 million HP every second with his battle recovery alone. That was more than 10 million HP per second. To make matters worse, now that Crodia held the dull grey sword, the weapon's death energy had formed a domain that enveloped a 30-yard radius around him. Even from outside the domain, Kola could sense how powerful that death energy was. All life within this domain rapidly decayed, crumbling to ash. Even the stone ground turned into sand before their eyes. The domain didn't contain even a trace of mana, either. They could easily imagine what would happen to players that stood within that dusky cloud of death. Hell Rush and the others were just as dumbfounded. None of them had ever thought Poison City's final boss would pull such a move. Monsters didn't normally use weapons or equipment, which meant they didn't receive item bonuses, relying on their own basic attributes. Even then, monsters presented a challenge. Now that Crodia had a weapon and his set of armor, how were they supposed to fight him? The system really isn't giving us any chance. Shifeng watched Crodia with a disheartened smile. Under normal circumstances, Shifeng would have some confidence of defeating the City Lord with his Ring of Gospel, but seeing Crodia now, he didn't have much hope of winning this battle. Within Secret Lands, players couldn't summon their personal guards, and the team's average level was still 5 levels lower than this boss. They might not even last through the boss's first phase, much less slay the undead. While the team members silently wondered how they should face this superior mythic monster, Blue Rainbow and Elder Gold turned deathly pale. Has something happened? Shifeng asked when he saw the two dark players' strange expressions. Our guilds have just received reports stating that the Alliance team Demon's Heart has killed the second boss on the Ancient Gods Tower's first floor. They're only 2 bosses away from clearing the first floor's trial and becoming the floor master, Blue Rainbow explained with a twisted frown. Thanks to their alliance with Zero Wing, both Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society were developing far faster than the Dark World's other powers. This was the reason that the Dark World's various powers and players didn't dare move against their guilds. However, that wouldn't be the case if Demon's Heart's team succeeded in activating the Ancient Gods Tower. Unlike Zero Wing, their guilds didn't have unstoppable NPC armies. If the Dark World's various powers and players decided to turn against their guild's members, only annihilation would await them. They've already started to raid the third boss. The news stunned Shifeng. Raiding the Ancient Gods Tower was as difficult as raiding a level 100+, super large-scale team dungeon. The Dark World's players should have needed at least 10 to 15 days before they'd have a chance of conquering the first floor, yet within 3 short days, the Alliance team Demon's Heart had already defeated the first 2 bosses. Their progress completely surpassed Shifeng's expectations. What should we do now, Guild Leader Black Flame? At this rate, Demon's Heart's Alliance team will conquer the first floor within 2 or 3 more days, Elder Gold asked anxiously. They hadn't expected Demon's Heart to be this powerful. Logically, even with the clues Demon's Heart possessed, the Alliance team shouldn't have made such astounding progress. Conquering the Ancient Gods Tower's trials would require a large number of Tier 3 players and sufficiently powerful weapons and equipment. Worse yet, Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society's main force members were stuck in Poison City. Even if they somehow managed to defeat Crodia, catching up to the Alliance team was unlikely. We have no choice, we have to try, Shifeng declared, turning to the City Lord. Do you have a plan, Guild Leader? Aqua Rose asked. Their team only had a little over 700 players. Every member would need to deal at least 15,000 damage per second just to overcome Crodia's battle recovery. However, they were facing a superior Mythic. Even under normal circumstances, Tier 3 experts, who hadn't unlocked their mana body's full potential, would only deal a little over -10,000 damage per second to this boss. Since Crodia had grown even stronger with the grey longsword in hand, they'd likely deal even less damage. Even factoring in Shurfeng and the several other players that had fully unlocked their mana bodies, they wouldn't have enough total damage per second to defeat the City Lord. This boss has a weakness we can take advantage of, but I don't know if we'll succeed or not, Shurfeng said, nodding. Shurfeng usually wouldn't be in such a hurry to fight Crodia. Rather, he'd help his team continue their grind in Poison City first. The Crimson-Eyed Sword Saint had only demanded that they defeat the City Lord. He had said nothing about slaying Crodia immediately. They should be able to roam the city and increase their strength. However, Shurfeng did not have that luxury right now. Demon's Heart was moving faster than he had expected. If they couldn't kill Crodia quickly and allowed Demon's Heart to occupy the Ancient God's Tower, only Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society would be at a disadvantage. Naturally, this was very bad news for Zero Wing, too. Shurfeng had been able to rely on the teleportation gate to drastically restrict the number of dark players moving to the main continent. Without that restriction, however, the Dark World's residents could do whatever they wanted outside of Cold Spring Forest. This was exactly why he had wanted to control the teleportation gate. He only had one night division, and there was a limit to the territories he could protect. Shurfeng turned toward his team and began assigning tasks. Kola would remain close to the boss, while the rest of the team would hide in the city's alleyways. Melee players would set up all kinds of traps, and ranged players would attack from the rooftops of various buildings. Remember, everyone. Only 100 players can be within 200 yards of the boss at any point. All melee players must stay away from Crodia. Healers, focus on the MT tanking the boss. Damage dealers just attack at will. MTs, switch positions once you've accumulated 3 stacks of death energy. Shurfeng reminded his team once everyone was in position. If there aren't any problems, let's start the raid. Normally, they'd need a 1,000-man, Tier 3 team to raid Poison City's final boss, but when they had fewer than that, they could take the City Lord on in 100-man teams. By doing so, they'd lower the boss's HP to a minimum. In exchange, the 100-man teams would face more stringent requirements. With most of the team members not being able to fulfill those requirements, they'd have higher chances of success raiding this boss with 100-man teams. Upon hearing Shurfeng's command, Kola charged at Crodia. Everyone on the team was stupefied the instant Kola moved within 200 yards of the City Lord. The boss's maximum HP dropped to just 2.1 billion, falling by more than half. However, the team now had a different problem. Rather than 700-plus players attacking a boss with 5.4 billion HP, they had to face a boss with 2.1 billion HP with no more than 100 players at a time. The raid difficulty had increased, not decreased. Suddenly, Crodia appeared before Kola with so much speed that not even the peak experts had time to react. The City Lord swung his longsword at Kola, the weapon leaving a black spatial tear in its wake. Kola flew backward like a cannonball, crashing into the ground roughly 20 yards away from the final boss. Even after blocking the attack with his shield, Kola still lost 50% of his HP. Fortunately, the attack had put quite a bit of distance between the Guardian Knight and the City Lord. Kola responded by activating Protection Blessing and running to a nearby alley. Meanwhile, 3 healers 50 yards away began to heal Kola in a frenzy, Sacred Lights and Healing Lights landing on the Guardian Knight, one after another, and restoring his HP to 2/3 of his max. 2 seconds later, Kola took another strike, throwing him into a nearby wall and robbing him of another third of his HP. Even after another round of healing spells, the 3 healers only restored his HP to half. After being thrown a few more times, Kola finally lured Crodia into the alleyway. Due to the alley's complex terrain, Crotia had a much harder time landing an attack. Just as the City Lord was about to hit Cola again, he stepped on one of the landmines the team had planted in the alley earlier. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU boom. A loud explosion echoed throughout Poison City, and a damage of over -1 million appeared above the undead's head. After taking a few more steps, Crotia triggered another magic trap and took more than -700,000 damage. Just before Crotia turned to search for the player responsible for the traps, Cola charged forth and used his Tier 3 Justice Roar, causing another -50,000 plus damage and recapturing the boss's aggro. Good. It's doable. Everyone, mind your positioning. Ranged players, attack with everything you have. Melee players, keep setting up traps. Shifeng shouted once Cola had solidified his hold on Crotia's attention. He then activated Miniature World. Chapter 2582, Lightshadow improves, tough ferocious beast. When Shifeng activated Miniature World, Crotia's movement speed, reaction speed, and basic attributes decreased as if the boss had stepped into a quagmire, but as a superior mythic, his resistance to the effects was quite high. Even as an intermediate master magician, Shifeng's Miniature World only reduced Crotia's basic attributes by 15% rather than 30%. After activating Miniature World, Shifeng quickly followed up by activating Ring of Brilliance, enhancing every ranged player's basic attributes. Meanwhile, the 90-plus ranged players within the City Lord's vicinity began to bombard the boss with skills and spells. Tier 3 Spell, Darkness Burn. Tier 3 Skill, Solitary Light. Tier 3 Spell, Consecutive Earthen Spikes. Spells and arrows tore apart the area while explosions shook Poison City. Damages exceeding -20,000 appeared above Crotia's head, one after another. Including the damage from the traps, the team dealt more than enough to overcome Crotia's battle recovery. Every member of the team was ecstatic to see this. When they had first seen Crotia, they had despaired. They had known they couldn't overcome the boss's battle recovery with their attacks alone. Killing this City Lord had seemed impossible. Now that they knew they could carrot his battle recovery, however, they knew what to do next. They needed to whittle away at Crotia's HP. Of course, that wouldn't be an easy task. To maximize their damage, Cola would have to lure Crotia into the traps the melee members had set up. Unfortunately, setting up traps required a long time, and they had very short durations. When no more than 100 players could be near the boss, their timing and position had to be perfect. Claiming that a single mistake could render all of their effort worthless was no exaggeration. As long as more than 100 players stood within 200 yards of the City Lord, his maximum HP would return to 5.4 billion. If that happened, Crotia would regenerate 54 million HP every 5 seconds. Even with Miniature World suppression, the superior mythic would still regain 50 million HP over 5 seconds. 100 players simply couldn't deal that much damage in so short a time. Fortunately, the team was composed of experts among experts. Even the weakest player had reached the flowing water realm. With Shifeng's wise command, none would make such devastating mistakes. Shifeng heaved a rueful sigh upon seeing the team's flawless coordination. He had to admit that it was truly wonderful for a guild to have a team of such prowess. Even though the team's equipment standards didn't meet the requirements, they still completed their tasks efficiently. This undoubtedly made the raid much easier. As time passed, Crotia gradually lost HP, 95%. 75%. 50%. When Crotia's HP fell to 50%, his fighting style changed as he stomped a foot, cracking the stone as the ground sank. The death energy around him began to spread, corroding everything within a 45-yard radius. Aside from Cola, who had activated a life-saving skill just in time, over a dozen Tier 3 experts evaporated, leaving nothing behind. Crotia bellowed furiously, and the death energy rapidly gathered above him. After a moment, the dense, black death energy transformed into the shadow of a 50-meter-tall nether dragon, flapping its foggy wings. Nether Dragon's shadow, ferocious beast, mythic, level 120 HP 6, 000, 000, 000, 000, 6, 000, 000, 000. How is that possible? Everyone cursed aloud when they saw the Nether Dragon's shadow. They had never thought that the boss monster could actually summon another boss. Ferocious beasts weren't like wild or demonic beasts. Their very existence was akin to a natural disaster. Some ferocious beasts were even stronger than dragons. While the Nether Dragon's shadow before them might not be as powerful as a true dragon, it was more than enough to instill despair. Chrodia alone was almost too much for them to handle. Now, they had to take on two bosses of Chrodia's caliber with just 100 players. This was a joke. Chrodia had grown considerably weaker after summoning the Nether Dragon's shadow, but he still wasn't an easy opponent. The Nether Dragon's shadow descended and slammed a clawed foot into a nearby building, shattering the structure and leaving a black hole in its place. The Tier 3 Elementalist positioned on the building had tried to use Blink, but he had still died in the attack. Not good. This boss's attacks have the spatial imprisonment effect. Hell Rush, who saw this from afar, grimly shouted. The spatial imprisonment effect was fatal to magical classes and players with teleportation skills. Once a being sealed the space around them, players could only physically evade an attack. However, magical class players had far less dexterity and speed than melee players. With the spatial imprisonment effect, even an ordinary mythic monster could instantly kill Tier 3 magical class players, let alone a mythic ranked ferocious beast. Just as the Nether Dragon was about to attack another player, a bolt of blue lightning struck its claw. Boom! With the sound of another explosion, the bolt diverted the Nether Dragon's claw into the street, the impact instantly forming a crater. Enraged over the interruption, the Nether Dragon's crimson eyes turned to glare at the figure that had launched the counterattack. Flapping its wings, the dragon's shadow sent a vortex of death energy at its new target. The vortex had a very large AoE and was basically impossible for players to avoid quickly. Wherever the vortex passed, even space shattered. Just as the death vortex was about to reach its target, the player in question raised his pitch-black longsword and swung it down in a vertical arc. The phantom of a gigantic greatsword appeared in the sky, slicing space and the death vortex in half, which then vanished into the void. Guild leader. Stunned, Aqua Rose turned to Shurfong, the player responsible for the interrupting lightning bolt. The Nether Dragon's death vortex had definitely been more powerful than an ordinary Tier 4 spell, yet Shurfong had bisected it with a single swing. It was unbelievable. Aside from Aqua Rose, Hell Rush, Blue Rainbow, and everyone else watching from afar were similarly astonished. They were talking about a full-powered attack from a Tier 4 ferocious beast. Even an MT like Cola would die instantly if he tried to block such an attack, yet Shurfong had countered it. Just how high was the swordsman's strength? Don't panic, everyone. Continue attacking Chrodia. I'll distract this Nether Dragon, Shurfong instructed, glancing at the players nearby. In truth, even he had been surprised by the power of his attack. He had thought he'd be lucky just to block the death vortex, yet his Lightshadow had shattered it. He had to admit that his upgraded Abyssal Blade was perfectly suited for the mana technique. Shurfeng's command rekindled everyone's confidence, and they resumed their responsibilities. Although the Nether Dragon had killed a few players, team members quickly filled the vacant spots. They still had several hundred Tier 3 players on standby outside of Chrodia's influence, so they had no worries about lacking manpower. For a time, one man and one dragon fought in the air, repeated shattering space around them. This looked nothing like a fight between a player and a monster, but a decisive battle between two heaven-defying monsters. Meanwhile, it was business as usual as the rest of the team kite Chrodia around the city, steadily chipping away at his HP. Of course, they weren't careless in their attacks. After all was said and done, Shurfong was only a player. Even with healer's support, there was a limit to his stamina and concentration. His fight with the Nether Dragon was insanely intense, and neither his stamina nor his concentration would last long at this pace. The team was in a race against time. Fortunately, the density of the death energy surrounding Crodia had decreased significantly after he had summoned the Nether Dragon's shadow, which, in turn, lowered the City Lord's magic resistance. This considerably increased the team's total DPS. However, Crodia had begun to launch even fiercer attacks. Every hit shattered a building and killed anyone caught unprepared. As a result, the team steadily lost members. Even as players died, however, Crodia's HP gradually decreased. 40%. 20%. 10%. Finally, when Crodia's HP fell to 1%, the Nether Dragon's shadow roared and transformed into over a dozen streams of death energy that returned to the final boss. Don't you dare think you can heal him. The sudden development didn't surprise Shifeng in the least. This was Crodia's trump card, which he would use when he was on the brink of death. Each stream of death energy could restore 3% of the superior Mythic's HP. To make matters worse, Crodia would summon the Nether Dragon's shadow once more after the healing process ended. This move had abruptly ended many superpowers raids in the past. Shifeng quickly activated the Abyssal Blade's Darkness domain and executed Sword's Orbit, using the 36 streams of Power of Darkness to prevent the death energy from approaching the City Lord. Quick! Attack with everything you've got. I can't hold them back for long. Shifeng shouted as the streams of death energy began to move faster. Players didn't have the power to destroy this death energy. They could only do their best to stop the energy from reaching the boss, but as more time passed, not only would the death energy move faster, but these streams would also multiply. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, attack! Zhao Yueru and the others shouted as they desperately bombarded Crodia with whatever spells they had available. They only had a small amount of mana remaining, and they had exhausted all of their powerful moves. All they could do was manipulate their mana to increase their spells' power and accuracy. 0, 5%. 0, 3%. 0, 1%. Boom! With one last explosion, Crodia transformed into a thick cloud of death energy, rapidly dispersing from the alley and spreading throughout Poison City. The team's survivors then heard the sounds of multiple system notifications. Chapter 2583, Clear Reward, S-Rank Rating System, Congratulations. You are the first team of players to complete Poison City's Secret Land Crusade. Rewarding level +1, 50 free mastery points, 5 legacy skill points, 1 exotic legacy potion, 20 God's Domain reputation points, and 40 Poison City reputation points. System, congratulations. You are the first team of players to challenge Poison City while below level 120 successfully. Rewarding 100 Poison City reputation points. System, congratulations. Your Poison City reputation has reached 100 points. Unlocking Poison City Exchange Merchant. You may now purchase Poison City's specialty items. System, congratulations. For completing the inferior legendary quest, Beginning of the End, in one day, you've received an S-Rank Clear rating. Rewarding level +1, 10 legacy skill points, and 1 silver legacy treasure chest. The series of system notifications momentarily stunned every survivor on the team. These rewards were simply too abundant. Even without the quest rewards, Crodia had awarded enough EXP to add another 40%, at least, to everyone's experience bars. Including the various quest rewards, everyone on the team rose by at least 2 levels. Even the players that had fallen in the battle and later resurrected had reached level 114. These rewards just saved us more than a fortnight of grinding and dungeon raids. If the others back in the guild find out about this, they'll likely die from envy, one of Dark Rhapsody's main force members said as he looked at his own level and available legacy skill points. Even the various superpowers peak experts would be lucky to reach level 110 by this stage of the game, yet the lowest level player among Dark Rhapsody's main force members had reached level 114, with many already at 115. In other words, they were one minor threshold ahead of the various superpowers peak experts. While a gap of 5 levels might not seem like much, it was massive after factoring in the difference in equipment and weapons. Furthermore, level 115 players could equip level 120 items. Aside from the significant increase in levels, the team members were elated when they saw how many legacy skill points they had earned. With 15 legacy skill points, they could learn a new tier 3 legacy skill, which would elevate their combat power to a whole new level. That's nothing. Take a look at the exotic legacy potion and silver legacy treasure chest. Now those are truly amazing, a level 115, tier 3 dark shield warrior exclaimed as he pulled an ink black potion and silver chest from his bag. When the rest of the team examined the two items' descriptions, an uproar swept through the team. Exotic legacy potion, Grandmaster potion, consumable, grants user guidance for 1 hour in unlocking the mana body or gaining mana control. Limit 1 per player. Silver legacy treasure chest, players have a high chance of obtaining a top-tier weapon or equipment piece catered to their class and level, a small chance of obtaining a tier 3 skill or spell book catered to their class, a very small chance of obtaining a piece of epic equipment, and a minute chance of obtaining a unique legacy or legacy weapon catered to their class upon opening this chest. Time limit, 1 natural day. All of God's Domain's tier 3 players dreamed of unlocking their mana body's full potential and gaining more mana control, but accomplishing either of these tasks was incredibly difficult. Even now, the various superpowers hadn't found a reliable method to accelerate the process and had to rely on their members' talent and skills. And yet, these players had just received a potion that offered an opportunity to make significant progress in both challenges. This was an astoundingly rare opportunity. If they took advantage of this opportunity properly, they might even become peak or apex experts in God's Domain. The silver legacy treasure chest was just as astronomically valuable. Even with crappy luck, the worst item they would obtain was a top-tier weapon or equipment piece suited for their classes and levels. Such a weapon or piece of equipment would provide a massive boost to their combat power, and if they got lucky, they might even acquire a piece of epic equipment. When the guild leader finds out about our rewards after working with Zero Wing, he'll likely laugh himself mad, Blue Rainbow said, sighing ruefully as she gazed at the open treasure chest before her. Her silver legacy treasure chest had granted a piece of level 115 dark gold equipment, yet this was the worst possible outcome. Dark Rhapsody had sent over 100 members to participate in Zero Wing's expedition, which meant that their team would return with more than 100 pieces of level 115 dark gold equipment, and that was if everyone had bad luck. To secure such a haul, they'd have to repeatedly raid level 115 team dungeons for more than 20 days. After all, only 100-man Hell Mode team dungeons and above had a chance of dropping dark gold equipment, and the drop rate wasn't even 100%. Yet, they had only tagged along with Zero Wing for a little over 3 days and gained such a bountiful harvest. When she reported this to her guild leader, he'd assume she was delusional or was acting as a spy for Zero Wing. The situation even dumbfounded Shurfong. The rewards are so abundant. Shurfong could not believe his eyes as he read the system notifications. Unlike everyone else, however, Shurfong wasn't focused on the exotic legacy potion or silver legacy treasure chests. Instead, the amount of Poison City reputation points awarded and the fact that they had unlocked the city's exchange merchant had caught his attention. Normally, earning Poison City reputation points was an incredible challenge. Players could only earn so many points by killing the final boss during the Secret Land's first clear. Subsequent kills yielded far less. Hence, players would need a very long time to gain enough points to get access to the exchange merchant. However, once the merchant had activated, players could purchase Poison City's specialty potions, potion recipes, and forging designs for weapons and equipment with magic crystals. The most famous of Poison City's specialty potions had to be the Misfortune Potion. Each bottle cost 1,000 magic crystals. When consumed, players had a 30% chance to gain a 12-hour mana boost, a 60% chance for no effect at all, and a 10% chance to suffer 3 hours of mana deficiency. Unlike the exotic legacy potion, players could consume as many misfortune potions as they wished. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Once players had activated Poison City's exchange merchant and had enough magic crystals, quickly unlocking their mana body's full potential was entirely possible. Unfortunately, the Misfortune Potion was bound on purchase. In other words, only the players that had earned enough Poison City reputation points would have the privilege of using the potion. This was why the various superpowers of Shi Feng's previous life had desperately raided Poison City again and again. Now, however, Shi Feng's entire team had access to this highly sought-after privilege after clearing the city once. Once he suppressed his excitement over activating the exchange merchant, Shi Feng glanced at the last system notification, which only he had received. System, congratulations. For completing the inferior legendary quest, Beginning of the End, with an S-rank clear rating, you have been awarded the Disaster Blade. You may seek out the Crimson-Eyed Sword Saint for legacy guidance once or request the Sword Saint strengthen the Disaster Blade. You have 5 minutes to decide.